We start with questions to the Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs, Fabian Hamilton.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As this is the first departmental question since the appointment of the Shadow Foreign Secretary, I welcome the Shadow Front Bench to their place. Alongside my right honourable friend, the Member for Wigan, the Foreign Secretary is establishing a new soft power council to advise government and shape a new strategy to increase UK soft power and harness it to deliver our foreign policy objectives. Promoting all our soft power assets, including the British Council, BBC, World Service, scholarships and values, is crucial if we're to generate growth, security and global impact for the UK.
In Hamilton.
I thank the Minister for that answer. The Government's commitment to UK soft power was highlighted by the Chancellor's additional funding for the BBC World Service in the recent budget. Mr. Speaker, last week I met with Moldovan MPs who are on the front line of Russian aggression. They really valued the British Council's presence until it had to close owing to funding cuts. Does the Minister agree that it would be detrimental to Britain's place on the world stage if the British Council was forced to close more offices, particularly where British values of freedom and democracy are needed most?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Foreign Secretary has made clear the UK is committed to supporting Moldova's democratic choice to pursue a path of freedom, independence and European integration. The FCDO provided £511 million in grant and aid funding for the 22 to 25 spending review period, and in an increasingly digital age, British Council's impact should be judged by operational rather than physical presence. The Council retains physical presence in over 100 countries. Those in other countries still access cultural engagement and teaching activities online.
Oh, let's take a new member of the backbenches, Andrew Mitchell, on his return.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May I wish my right honourable friend, the new Shadow Foreign Secretary, every success in her role. And may I wish also the honourable gentleman and the entire government foreign affairs team courage and wisdom as they deal with a world more dangerous than at any time in our lifetimes. And can I remind them, when it comes to soft power and development, of the importance of the words best articulated by the former US Defence Secretary Mattis, which are these: that if you cut development spend, you have to order more ammunition.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and let me pay tribute to the Right Honourable Friend's long commitment to these issues. I returned last week from Pakistan, where I was first deployed when he was the Secretary of State for Development, so I know well his commitment to these issues over a long period. I agree with the sentiment of the Right Honourable Member's question. The aid budget is incredibly important. It makes a significant contribution to our national security right across the world, and we continue to work hard to ensure that our aid budget is fit for purpose and doing the job it needs to do on behalf of the UK right across the world.
And another new member to the front bench, Wendy Morton, Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whether it's the findings of the election monitors in Georgia, interference in the recent elections in Moldova, the illegal invasion of Ukraine, or the chill that's been felt from the Baltics to Bucharest, Europe today is a much more contested space. This is really the moment to pin our colours to the mast and be much more active in supporting those with Euro-Atlantic aspirations. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister, how will he build on the efforts of the last government and use our considerable soft power to be much more proactive?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We continue to engage heavily on these issues. The Foreign Secretary was in Moldova last week. We are committed to enhancing the UK's soft power after a period of decline, and that is why the Foreign Secretary will be launching the Soft Power Council with the Right Honourable Member for Wigan in the coming weeks.
Clive Jones.
Question number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Foreign Secretary.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 2 and 10 together. Palestinian communities have suffered horrific violence at the hands of Israeli settlers. In October, the government sanctioned 3 outposts and 4 entities linked to violence in the West Bank. I won't speculate about future sanctions designations. That would only reduce their impact, but we continue to explore all options to take tougher action.
Clive Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Settlement expansion in the occupied Palestinian territories remains as one of the biggest barriers to peace in the Middle East. In October, the Foreign Secretary said that as long as violent extremists remain unaccountable, the UK and the international community will continue to act. So will he commit today to consider sanctions against the extremist ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich in the Israeli government?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, look, I was very clear that, and I have been in office, and that's why in October I targeted the Amana Group, which is a settler group which operates as a commercial construction company, and I was pleased that the US followed us in those sanctions just last week. I also was concerned about a religious school promoting violence against Jews. I sanctioned them. An NGO providing volunteers for illegal outposts. I sanctioned them. Of course, we continue to keep sanctions policy under consideration. We are very concerned with both the violence and the expansion and the rhetoric that we're hearing from members of the Israeli government.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listened carefully to my right and friend's answer, and he's saying he's not going to speculate on future sanctions. But the two ministers named are encouraging settler violence. They have called for the annexation of the West Bank into Israel. So does my right friend accept that even if he won't talk about further sanctions today, he can recognise that that threat of annexation is real, and until we come out clearly and support an independent Palestinian state, then the settlers will continue with their violence in the belief eventually they can achieve the annexation they want.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I commend my right honourable friend for standing up for these issues, Mr. Speaker, and make it absolutely clear. Annexation would be illegal, and we would stand opposed to it. I want to make that fundamentally clear, and he should be assured that we will continue to speak out against both illegal violence against settlers and settler expansion.
Tom Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. International law is absolutely vital for us to build a platform for a more secure and peaceful world. So does the government recognise and support the ICC's jurisdiction, and will it cooperate fully with the court to ensure it can carry on its work without obstruction?
Yes, 100%, Mr. Speaker.
Come to the Chair of the Select Committee, Emily Thornbury.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask my right honourable friend about Ben-Gvir and Smotrich as well. And perhaps if I ask it a different way, we might be able to get an answer. Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton tells us that before the last general election, the Foreign Office were working up potential sanctions against these two most controversial and infamous settlers and government ministers. I appreciate that sanctions are kept under review. I wonder if he might be in a position to be able to tell us when a decision might be made about these two, or if a decision has already been made.
Foreign Secretary.
What can I say to the right honourable lady? Mr. Speaker, I think that the previous Foreign Secretary was wrong to talk about sanctions under consideration, particularly sanctions that he said was under consideration in office and then didn't do. I'm not going to get drawn on sanctions policy from this dispatch box, but I'm pleased that the honourable lady is raising these issues with such importance, and I think that all looking can see the strength of feeling in the House.
The Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Colin Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The comments last week by Finance Minister Smotrich advocating the annexation of the West Bank, together with the continuing devastation in northern Gaza, have reinforced that elements of the Israeli cabinet have no interest in a two-state solution. There's now a real and imminent risk that the extremists in the Israeli cabinet will succeed in annexing Palestinian territories before any negotiations can take place. So in light of this, does the Foreign Secretary agree that now is the time to recognise Palestine?
Foreign Secretary.
What can I say to the right honourable gentleman that yesterday at the G7 meeting in Rome, foreign ministers discussed this very same issue, and I think we were united, all of us, in condemning any suggestion of annexation. We would stand against it.
Chris Law.
Number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is determined to rebuild the UK's reputation on international development. We've announced a doubling of support for people hit by the humanitarian emergency in Sudan, as well as providing support for people in Gaza, Lebanon and other crisis situations.
Chris Law.
Mr Speaker, the Government's insistence on continuing to implement the Tories' deep and damaging cuts to the aid budget and unprecedented levels of ODA spending on in-donor refugee costs are resulting in reductions, pauses and cancellations of overseas ODA projects. I see you're shaking your head. I'm looking forward to your response. So can the Minister recognise the UK Government cannot say it's back on the global stage while these Boris Johnson-inspired policies continue to cut deep into our development policy? Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I can tell the honourable gentleman that our programme budget for the SCDO is actually going to be in 2025 to 2026 at its highest level in recent years. We're able to deliver that because this government is taking action on the issues that the previous government did not tackle, in particular the in-donor refugee costs that have eaten into that budget. We saw just gimmicks, we did not see action. Instead, the new government is taking action.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The humanitarian crisis in Sudan is horrific, and it's clear that rape is being used as a weapon of war. Recent data from MSF highlights that 90% of sexual violence survivors in a hospital in Chad were abused by armed perpetrators. 50% were attacked in their homes. This is happening in 2024. So can the Foreign Secretary provide details on how the UK's recent pledges on humanitarian aid for Sudan and the region are being utilised to support survivors of sexual and gender-based violence?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for raising that incredibly concerning situation, and the UK has been determined to do all that we can, particularly in relation to conflict-related sexual violence. In October 2024, it was the UK that led moves to secure the renewal of the mandate of the fact-finding mission at the UN Human Rights Council. As just mentioned, we recently doubled humanitarian aid, and the Foreign Secretary also led efforts at the UN Security Council to take action on the humanitarian emergency in Sudan.
Welcoming Andrew Rossendale, the Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Government appears to be in a complete tailspin over whether it will release the costs that will fall to the British taxpayer as a result of the rush deal to give away the British Chagos Islands. Given the reported trip by the Special Envoy Jonathan Powell to Mauritius, can the Minister at least confirm today which budget these costs will come from, including whether they intend to use the aid budget, tell the House how much it will cost each year and in total, and if the British Chagossians will actually have a genuine say? But, Mr Speaker, would it not make more sense to keep these strategically important islands under the Crown rather than the secretive deal negotiated? No deal is better than a bad deal.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, my understanding is there was actually 10 rounds of negotiations under the Conservatives, that we did not see the UK reaching the agreement necessary. This is a bizarre argument, frankly, coming from the opposition. All the details of this situation are in the public domain, quite rightly so, and this is part of the UK ensuring that we follow international law.
Question 4, Mr Speaker.
Foreign Secretary.
We're committed to securing consular access and release of Mr El Fattah. We continue to raise, Mr Speaker, Mr El Fattah's case at the highest levels with the Egyptian government. The Prime Minister raised this with President Sisi on the 8th of August, and I last raised it with the Egyptian Foreign Minister yesterday.
Brian Lishman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the Foreign Secretary for his answer. Ala Abdel Fattah's mother, Leila Suif, is in the gallery with us today on the 58th day of her hunger strike in protest of the continued imprisonment of her son, and that Leila wants to know that her government is doing everything it can to bring her son home. Will the Foreign Secretary guarantee that the UK government will put a hold on any new economic or financial partnerships with Egypt unless and until British national Ala Abdel Fattah is freed?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I look forward to meeting Mrs El Fattah later on today, and I want to reassure him personally that I share his determination and resolve to see Allah reunited with his family And their love and dedication to him, I think, is obvious to many parliamentarians who they have met and campaigned with over this last period. He will understand that with the terrible situation in Gaza, it is important that this government continues to speak to our Egyptian friends who have obviously real proximity to Gaza particularly. But I understand the strength of feeling, and that's why the Prime Minister's raised this. I have raised this on successive occasions, and we will continue to lobby. He's a dual national. We will continue to lobby on his behalf.
Duncan-Smith.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, thank you for that. Can I, pursuant to this, and also that I fully support the call for his release, but also in the same area, in the UAE, Ryan Cornelius spent 16 years, much of it in solitary confinement, illegally held by the UAE. Can I ask, when the Secretary of State says he will pursue these things rigorously, when he went to the UAE recently, he didn't raise the case of Brian Cornelius with the UAE?
Foreign Secretary.
Can I reassure the right honourable gentleman, the situation of Ryan Cornelius has been raised with UAE, and officials continue to provide consular access to Mr. Cornelius and Mr. Ridgely, and are in contact with their families at this time. It is a serious case. We're absolutely aware of it, and UAE know we're very concerned.
John MacDonald.
I can completely understand and appreciate what the Foreign Secretary has said with regard to maintaining a relationship with Egypt because of the issue in Gaza. But the reality is this family has suffered enough. And the reality is also that President Sisi will only move if there is an economic threat. And therefore, could I ask him that after he meets the family tomorrow, that he actually contacts the President's office to make it absolutely clear that our economic relationship will suffer unless this British citizen is released.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, he should be reassured that I spoke to the Egyptian Foreign Minister yesterday. I said to him that I was meeting Mrs. Al-Fattah today. I urged him to look at what parliamentarians are saying about this case. It's of huge concern, and I pressed him to do more. We have continued to do that with the Egyptians. It's obviously sensitive because of the situation in Gaza, but I don't think they're under any doubt how seriously this is taken by the British system, the government and this Parliament.
Brendan O'Hara.
Speaker, the APPG on arbitrary detention and hostage affairs has been hearing evidence from UK nationals who are being or who have been detained, and we were privileged to hear from Allah's mother just this morning. An oft-repeated concern is that if you are a UK national and you find yourself in this awful situation, you're essentially on your own when compared to other nationals. Does the Minister recognise that depiction? And if he doesn't, what could he point to as being a unique advantage of having a British passport for someone who finds himself arbitrarily detained?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I recognise that the honourable gentleman has got some problem with having a British passport, but I haven't got a problem with having a British passport, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to be a citizen of this great country, and let me say that we've got some outstanding diplomats and officials in FCDO. We did recognise, of course, in opposition, that there are issues in this area. That's why we've said we'll come forward with a special representative to work with hostage families.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Allah's friends and family, whom I have the privilege to represent as my local constituents, just want their brother, their uncle, their son home safe. Now, previously, the Foreign Secretary, who I know has worked hard on this issue, and as he says, has raised it with the Egyptians, has talked about what we could do if the Egyptians won't restore consular access. They still have not done so. So could the Foreign Secretary update us? I know this House speaks as one in standing and demanding that Allah be freed and able to come home to his family for this Christmas. But what more can he do and will he do if the Egyptians won't restore consular access to the family?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, look, I know that my right honourable friend has campaigned diligently on the family's behalf. She will know that the Egyptians do not accept his dual nationality. That is an issue between us. It's for that reason that they deny consular access. Currently, that access is through his lawyer. I am urging them to understand that he got that citizenship in the usual way, just like other members of his family. There was no conspiracy on behalf of the state in the way that he got that citizenship. And I continue to press them on that very issue, which would allow him to have the consular access that he deserves.
Jim Shepard.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State very much for that answer, and can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for Alloa and Greensmouth for bringing this forward as well. It's not the only case the Honourable Gentleman, Right Honourable Gentleman for Chingford Woodford Green referred to. I would think of Jimmy Lai as a third one. Their UK and British passport has to mean something, Secretary of State. With that in mind, is it not time to set aside a section within the FCDO that specifically looks at these cases, tasked with getting our British citizens back home to this United Kingdom? Thank you.
Well, as the Honourable Gentleman mentions Jimmy Lai, let me just say once again that we call on the Hong Kong authorities to immediately release British national Jimmy Lai. Jimmy Lai is a significant priority for this government. That is why the Prime Minister raised it with the President of China just last week, and it's why I raised it with the Foreign Minister of China as well. He's right. This does need a close look by this new government. We're just over 4 months old. We are looking at it, and we will come forward with proposals shortly.
John Lovell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 5.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ensuring the safe release of all hostages, including British national Emily Damari and 3 other hostages with strong UK links, remains a top priority for this government. We support efforts of negotiators and call on the parties to return to negotiations. We continue to work alongside allies and partners in the region towards hostage releases. Negotiations remain the best chance to get hostages cruelly detained by Hamas home to their loved ones. I relayed these points to the Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister yesterday.
Thank you. Well, the horrors that have been endured by the 97 Israelis and foreign nationals held hostage by Hamas terrorists in Gaza for over 13 months are unthinkable. Given the efforts to secure the release have not yet been successful, what further steps is the United Kingdom taking to bring home Emily Damari, a 28-year-old British citizen, and the rest of the captives?
Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House joins with me in saying to those families that we, both as a House and as a government, will do absolutely everything that we can. The horrors of being a hostage family are unbearable, and we have them in our mind each and every day. We are disappointed to see that talks to secure hostage releases appear to have stalled for the moment. We are urging all parties to return to the table. A deal remains the best prospect, and we hope to work with our allies in order to see that come through.
Holly Billington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Security Council on Friday failed to adopt a text put forward by its 10 elected members that called for an immediate, unconditional and permanent ceasefire in Gaza and demanded the release of all hostages on account of a negative vote cast by a permanent member. That is extremely disappointing, condemning thousands of people in the Middle East to ongoing conflict and moving no further forward to securing the release of the hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. However, I and many of my constituents welcome the fact that the UK voted for this resolution. What will the Minister's next steps be in securing greater global agreement on securing peace, a ceasefire and the release of the hostages?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government will continue to do everything that we can to press for ceasefire, the release of all hostages and a reduction in violence in the Middle East. The Foreign Secretary discussed these matters in the G7. I discussed them with my Israeli counterpart yesterday, and we will continue to take all steps across a wide range of different conversations in order to try and advance the ceasefire that we so desperately need.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last week I spoke with Mandy Damari, and I know the Minister has mentioned Emily, and in fact the Foreign Secretary and his team have been in touch with the family as well. It's obvious that she and so many other hostage families are going through the most unimaginable suffering. So can the Minister, I think if I may on behalf of the Foreign Secretary, confirm as to whether any aid organisations have had any humanitarian access to these hostages? And if not, what kind of pressure is being exerted on these agencies? Because one of the clear things that we are hearing is that welfare concerns absolutely are paramount, but also these poor families are suffering such unimaginable horrors and concerns. And importantly, our aid budget needs to be spent in the right way. So can he just tell us what work is being undertaken on this?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Regrettably, no organisation has had access to the hostages. We continue to call for access for ICRC and any other appropriate NGO in the usual way. Let us be clear, Hamas hold these hostages. They are behaving abominably, out with any international norm. They are not abiding by any convention that you could possibly think of. We will continue to press them to ensure that British nationals get the access that they require. But this is very regrettable for the whole House that we're in this position.
James McCleary.
Question number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary attended the EU Foreign Affairs Council on the 14th of October, and in the margins he agreed with EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs Borrell to work towards a security partnership and committed to 6 monthly foreign policy dialogues starting in early 2025. And yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I met with EAS Secretary General Sonino to discuss some of our vital shared interests, including Ukraine, hybrid threats and the Western Balkans, alongside ministerial colleagues.
James McCleary.
I thank the Minister for his answer. President-elect Trump's confirmation of tariffs on Canada, one of the US's closest allies, raises serious concerns about the willingness to honour the US-UK special relationship. If this is the future of US relations with their closest partners, does the Minister agree that closer cooperation with the EU on defence and trade are now urgently needed, including access to the European Customs Union and a defence pact with the EU going beyond the recent agreement with Germany?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and we of course have a thriving trading and investment relationship with the United States, with more than 1 million British citizens working for US firms and vice versa, and we look forward to working with President-elect Trump in office, including on his policy priorities, and to improve our trading relations. Our need to work together in Europe on security issues, I think, is absolutely clear to all members of this House, whether it's the threat from Russia, the war in Ukraine, the hybrid threats, the situation in Moldova, the situation in the Western Balkans, and that's exactly what we're getting on with and doing.
Phil Brittle.
Mr. Speaker, I very much welcome the recent announcement of the UK-Germany bilateral defence agreement, which was signed at record-breaking pace by the new government at Trinity House last month. This will bolster closer working with Europe's largest economy on wider defence and security matters at a time of increasing Russian aggression across Europe. With this in mind, can the Minister therefore explain to the House how the Trinity House agreement fits into wider discussions with EU and NATO counterparts around defence and security?
Well, I thank the honourable friend for his remarks on that important treaty work that we're doing. I know he takes a keen interest in matters relating to UK-German relations. We continue to engage with German colleagues from across the spectrum. We're keen to get this treaty agreed as soon as possible. And for me, this very naturally fits with both our NATO membership and that new enhanced dialogue that we have with the EU on security and defence matters.
Stephen Little.
Number 7, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'll answer questions 7 and 9 together. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is catastrophic. The UK's recent vote for the UN Security Council resolution on Gaza has already been mentioned. It called for a huge scale-up in aid across Gaza. We need that aid access, and restrictions on aid are unacceptable.
Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The International Development Committee recently heard testimony from Nazam Mahmoud, a surgeon recently returned from the Nasser hospital in Gaza, describing Israeli drones picking off injured children after bombings. His account echoed an October New York Times report which cited 44 doctors, nurses and paramedics who witnessed numerous cases of prepubescent children shot in the head or chest during the ongoing conflict in Gaza. What steps is the government taking to prevent a genocide in Gaza?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard a number of deeply concerning reports about developments in Gaza. I know that has also been the case for the Select Committee, as mentioned. The UK Government's position could not be clearer. International law, including international humanitarian law, must be held to, and that particularly, of course, also covers the operations of healthcare workers. We pay tribute to them operating in such difficult circumstances.
David Smith.
Mr. Speaker, as we've been hearing, the situation in Gaza, especially northern Gaza, is dire, with the UN anticipating that up to 60,000 children under the age of 5 this year could be facing acute malnutrition. At the same time, when the trucks entering Gaza have reduced by 63% since October 23. Now, I welcome the leading role that the government is taking in providing vital humanitarian aid for Gaza, but does the Minister agree with me that the ongoing Israeli restrictions on the flow of essential aid are completely unacceptable and should be lifted immediately?
Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and we're seeing a very disturbing impact from those restrictions. We've seen it in the famine assessment, in the levels of malnutrition and ill health now prevalent in Gaza. Winter, of course, is now upon us, making that situation even worse. Those restrictions on aid are unacceptable. They must be lifted immediately.
Up to Andrew Morrison.
When the Foreign Secretary was in Baku recently for Cop29, Mr. Speaker, did he discuss with his interlocutors across the region the extent to which the global finance goals will be impacting on humanitarian assistance in the Middle East?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, the Foreign Secretary did discuss those matters, including directly with Maya Motley, who of course is the Premier of Barbados, who has been leading many of the small island developing states on these issues. Certainly for the UK, we're determined to make sure that we play our part on humanitarian issues as well as globally on climate issues. That's so important for our own country as well as the rest of the world.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I asked the Foreign Secretary some weeks ago about getting assurances that children receiving polio vaccinations will not be killed after receiving these vaccinations. Since that assurance, thousands of children have been killed in northern Gaza. My question is this. Given the ICC's ruling recently about war crimes, the British public no doubt wants to know, why is this government shying away from its legal and moral obligations of banning all arms and all trade?
Minister.
The UK government has been determined to use every mechanism to advance international humanitarian law. That includes within the UN Security Council, as we've just been discussing, Mr. Speaker, but also we've been taking action at every bilateral and multilateral opportunity. Most recently, of course, I mentioned the UN Security Council, but also in issues around polio too, where the UK led those efforts to get vaccination going in the first place. Thank you.
Chair of the Development Committee, Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In October, the Israeli Knesset passed 2 laws relating to UNRWA: the law for the cessation of UNRWA activities in the State of Israel and the law for cessation of UNRWA activities. These will take effect on the 28th of January, and the consequence will be preventing aid distribution in Gaza and the prevention of both primary care, education and indeed refuse collection in the West Bank. Last week, my committee was in Palestine and Jordan. There is huge concern that if this legislation does take effect, it will breach numerous international laws and will have a catastrophic effect on the humanitarian and security situation in the region. So can the Foreign Secretary detail what conversations she's had with the Israeli counterparts to prevent this implementation, and what you're doing with the international community to protect a UN organisation?
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for raising this important issue, and indeed for her committee for the work that they have engaged in on this subject. The UK government has been absolutely clear. UNRWA is the only agency that can deliver aid at the scale and depth that is required in the middle of this humanitarian emergency. She asked about the representations being made by the UK government. I have made those representations myself, including at the UN General Assembly. The Minister for Middle East and North Africa has made those representations yesterday. The Foreign Secretary has made them a number of times, including to his Israeli counterparts. It's very clear those restrictions on operation of UNRWA must not be implemented by the Israeli government.
Richard Ford.
Mr. Speaker, the humanitarian situation in the Middle East is made worse by arms supplied from within and beyond the region. The Liberal Democrats have a long-standing policy that the UK government should not be exporting arms to Israel or to the occupied Palestinian territories, given that they were referred to in the FCDO's last human rights report. Will the FCDO extend the number of arms export licences that are denied to Israel by the UK?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would gently encourage the honourable member to look at the action that was taken by the UK government a number of weeks ago now, Mr. Speaker, which was to suspend a number of arms licences. We believe that was important because of that risk towards breaking international humanitarian law. This UK government takes its responsibilities in that regard very seriously indeed.
Foreign Secretary Dame Priti Patel.
The root cause of so much of the terrible humanitarian suffering we see in the Middle East today is the regime in Tehran, fueling the Houthis, Hamas and Hezbollah, and brutally repressing its own people, while also bailing out Putin's war machine and even plotting to assassinate individuals based here in the UK. Now, beyond sanctions with Iran, which we all support and successive governments have put in place over the years, can I ask the Minister, on behalf of the Foreign Secretary, what exactly is the comprehensive plan now to start dealing with this repressive regime that is causing so much brutality across the Middle East?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are deeply concerned about the destabilising impact of the Iranian regime within the region and indeed beyond it. The Right Honourable Lady mentioned a number of cases where we can see that impact very clearly. I would also underline, Mr. Speaker, that the truly devastating humanitarian crisis that we're seeing presently in Yemen is very much connected to Iranian backing for the Houthis. We have repeatedly raised our concerns around this bilaterally and multilaterally. We are very clear that we have to have a very strong voice as a UK government on these matters, and that's exactly what we're delivering.
Question 8, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Echo 2 telephone contract for telephones in the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office is 79% completed, but is on track for a completion in January 2025. Ministers and officials have been working day and night to fix the procurement mistakes of the government which went before.
Romello.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Echo 2 programme is crucial for delivering the new global communications network for the FCDO. You mentioned it's due for completion in January 2025. Will it remain within budget? What are the plans to ensure it delivers its full technical and financial benefits? And does the Minister see any additional support or adjustments that will be needed in order to ensure its delivery?
Minister.
With increased scrutiny and hard-working ministers and officials, we will reach all targets, and I will write to him with more detail on his specific question.
Chris Curtis.
Question number 11, Mr. Speaker.
Minister. Oh, for it.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 11 and 14 together. I was proud to join ministers across government in showing UK leadership on the climate and nature crisis at Cop29. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, announced our ambitious 2035 emissions reduction target. I reaffirmed our commitment to the Global South through $11.6 billion in climate finance.
Chris Curtis.
Thank you. At COP29, under a Labour government, the UK reclaimed its position as a global leader on climate action. We recognise now that our security and prosperity hinge on addressing this crisis. Would my right honourable friend join me in welcoming the progress made on climate finance, whilst acknowledging that there is much more to do to keep us on track with that roadmap and to keep 1.5 degrees alive?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for his question? I do think it was important that our Prime Minister was the only G7 Prime Minister to attend COP, and he will recall that last year the Prime Minister at the time did not attend. It's hugely important that we reach the £300 billion for climate finance. It will help the Global South get there on clean energy, and of course we hope that our Global Clean Energy Power Alliance will be able to work with them, and they've got the money now to do it.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The world's forests are the lungs of the earth, but we are losing them at an alarming rate. An area the size of Azerbaijan, where COP29 was hosted, is being destroyed every year. Can the Foreign Secretary explain what the government is doing to preserve the world's forests and to support those who protect them?
I was very pleased to speak at COP on the issue of forests and to join inspirational Indigenous leaders on that subject, and it's why we found 3 billion for nature, of which 1.5 billion is dedicated to work on forests.
Blow back to it.
Number 12, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, ahead of the elections on 11th of October, I expressed my concerns directly to Foreign Minister Darchishvili regarding pressure on civil society and stigmatisation of minorities ahead of the parliamentary elections. And following the elections, I publicly expressed support for the OSCE's preliminary findings in relation to the election, and I called on the Georgian authorities to investigate all irregularities and reverse their declining commitment to an inclusive and open democracy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for his actions on this. I draw the House's attention to my register of interest in the work I've done in the past with democratic activists in Georgia. Those activists are terrified that Georgia is now a turning point. So I wonder if the Minister will join me in calling for new elections under international oversight, an end to the attacks on civil society groups, especially the heroic LGBT groups who are under attack there. And if those things don't take place, whether the government will keep open the option of sanctions on those individuals who are responsible for the democratic backsliding in Georgia.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I recognise my honourable friend's long-standing interest in this issue and his strong views on it. Let me be clear that on the 28th of October, His Majesty's Ambassador to Georgia called on the Central Election Commission to transparently investigate all alleged instances of election fraud. And following the session of the new Parliament meeting, the Embassy again reiterated our concerns about election violations and the need for independent investigation. He is absolutely right. The right to peaceful protest and free civil society is a key attribute of any modern European democracy and must be respected, and we will continue to make this clear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I first of all pay tribute to the honourable member for East Renfrewshire, whose focus on Georgia has been incredibly important, not just to the free elections in Georgia, but actually to the spread of Putin's evil influence across Europe. May I ask the Minister what actions he's taking to push back on Russia's influence in the region and actually push back into Russia itself, using the budget he has on the BBC World Service to broadcast in subnational languages inside Russia so that the people of Russia know what is being done in their name and they can understand what Putin is doing to them.
Minister.
Well, the right honourable gentleman, Mr. Speaker, is absolutely right to point to the important work the BBC World Service does in this area, particularly its language services, and I've met their fantastic staff in the past who do this important work. It's important that people have access to free, accurate and impartial information, including in their own languages. But we've been clear about the extent of Russian interference in Georgia for a long time. We're clear about their interference across Europe and in democracies. That's why we're working so closely with NATO and indeed EU partners on this very issue.
Gerald Bain.
Number 13, sir.
Minister.
The United States is an indispensable ally, and I'm committed to the depth and breadth of the UK-US relationship. The Prime Minister and I met with President-elect Trump in September for dinner. It was a good opportunity to get to know each other, and of course we continue to work with the current administration. I was with Tony Blinken just yesterday.
Mr. Speaker, defence spending is a key aspect of our relationship with the United States. So will the Foreign Secretary be able to tell our American allies the date on which we're going to increase defence spending to 2.5%? And if he cannot, what influence will we have on European allies to increase their defence spending?
Foreign Secretary.
The honourable gentleman's right to raise the issue of defence spending. It's been raised by US President since Eisenhower. And he's right that when Donald Trump came to power, there were just 4 European countries spending above 2%. When we left government, it was 2.5%. We're sad that it dropped, and we're determined to get it back to 2.5% of GDP.
Let's come to topicals with Richard.
Topical number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary.
In the past month, growth was at the heart of my visit to Africa. We agreed work on a new global plan in South Africa and a new strategic partnership with Nigeria. During our UN Security Council presidency, we've shown support for Ukraine 1,000 days into the war and pressed for a lasting peace in the Middle East, and I condemned Russia's shameful veto of a resolution on Sudan. Finally, throughout COP, we've been restoring British leadership on climate.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. Since coming to office, this government has suspended arms export licences to Israel, rolled over on the ICC with nothing new against Hamas terrorists, poured cash into UNRWA despite concerns over Hamas double-hatting a significant number of the UNRWA staff. Many of these have been published in Arabic on the UK government's website, Mr Speaker. So I've got a couple of questions. Who decides what should be published in Arabic? Why are they being published in Arabic? And as they relate to Israel, why is nothing being published in Hebrew?
Foreign Secretary.
The art of diplomacy is speaking to foreign leaders, foreign nations, as best we can in the UK national interest. Sometimes that does involve foreign languages. That's why, for example, we support the BBC World Service. It was a slightly bizarre question.
Sean Davis.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We can all agree that ending human trafficking across the English Channel requires a coordinated approach with all the countries that people are being trafficked from. Can the Foreign Secretary or one of the ministers assure the House that the French government shares our commitment to smashing the gangs and ending these crossings?
Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend will be pleased, Mr Speaker, that I met with the French Foreign Minister just last week in London and discussed these issues, and we agreed to coordinate to better. And of course, the Home Secretary is working very closely with the new Interior Minister of France.
Foreign Secretary, Kendall.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the relationship the government is building with China appears to be all give and no take. So in order to convince the House this is a different situation, can the Foreign Secretary state, since his recent visits to China and his future visits to China, what has been achieved with regard to advancing Britain's interests on security, economic practices and on human rights?
Secretary.
Can I welcome the Honourable Lady to her place and remind her that under the last government there were about 7 different China policies and very little was achieved. We've had 4.5 months and I was very pleased to be in China discussing issues on which we disagree, agree and on which we challenge China, and will continue to do that over the coming months and years.
Dame Prince Patel.
Mr Speaker, in light of his response, can the Foreign Secretary categorically state that in his conversations with Chinese counterparts, has the UK government explicitly called for the national security law in Hong Kong to be repealed, and has he specifically called for Jimmy Lai to be released, and will he ensure that no deals such as the application for the Chinese embassy go ahead until Jimmy Lai is free?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for raising the situation in Hong Kong. It was a substantial part of our conversation. Of course, we raised issues around Jimmy Lai, which I've said in the House before, and of course the security law in Hong Kong. There are disagreements between us. We were very, very clear about that. And she can be sure that on issues of our representation, both in this country and their representation, these are matters that will pass through our system in the usual way without government interference.
Patrick Hurley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's nearly 8 months now since an IDF attack on a World Central Kitchen convoy killed 7 aid workers, including 3 Britons, James Henderson, John Chapman and James Kirby. So does the Foreign Secretary agree that their families deserve to see accountability and justice for their deaths?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very grateful for the question. It was very important for me to meet with the families a few weeks ago. The killing of 7 World Central Kitchen aid workers, including those British nationals, in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza on the 1st of April was appalling and a matter of great concern. It was important for me to meet with the families, and we continue to urge the Advocate General in Israel to proceed with a proper investigation and inquiry, and to get on with that as quickly as possible.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Colin Miller.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I welcome the Foreign Secretary's announcement that the UK will sanction Russia's so-called shadow fleet. Yet I understand the UK has not levied a single fine for breaching the existing sanctions on Russia's oil. Will the Foreign Secretary and Chancellor now take more robust action to ensure that UK sanctions are complied with?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I was very pleased to see President Zelensky just yesterday recognising UK leadership on challenging the shadow fleet, and I've made this part of my personal mission, which he will know, a record number of oil tankers. We're leading the world in sanctioning the shadow fleet. He's also right to say that there are issues around enforcement, and that's why we've instigated a review.
But Speaker, last month I met with the Ukrainian ambassador to the United Kingdom, General Zaluzhny, where he raised the importance of ensuring Ukrainian children and young people forced to flee this terrible conflict in their own country get the support and education they need so they can be the generation that rebuilds Ukraine. Can the Foreign Secretary tell me what conversations he's had with the Ukrainian government and his ministerial colleagues to ensure that this is the case?
Foreign Secretary.
He raises a very important issue. I met with the Ukrainian children a few months ago in Ukraine who had been taken to Russia and fortunately brought back to Ukraine by an NGO that we were supporting. We've increased our funds for this important work both in Ukraine and in Moldova, where I was last week.
James McCleary.
Mr. Speaker, the EU has been very clear that they will welcome a new youth mobility scheme with the UK. As the Minister knows, this would not be a return to freedom of movement and could be agreed separately from the trade and cooperation agreement the UK signed when we left the EU. So can the Minister tell me, this House and the young people of this country, why the government will not sit down with European allies to agree a new youth mobility scheme?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're engaged in a number of conversations with our EU counterparts at the moment, my colleague in the Cabinet Office and myself and the Foreign Secretary and others, but I'm not going to give a running commentary on this. We will look at EU proposals on a range of issues, but there are no plans for a youth mobility scheme, nor will we return to freedom of movement.
Mike Tupp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is vital that we continue to supply Ukraine with aid in the face of Russian aggression. Minister, is this combined with diplomatic efforts to bring about a just and lasting peace in line with UN conventions?
Who wants it? Somebody wants it, please.
Mr. Speaker, our support is absolutely absolute and resolute. I'm very happy to meet the honourable member to discuss these issues further, and we will continue in that position.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Will the Foreign Secretary take every opportunity to impress on the incoming President the vital importance of the Article 5 guarantee, whereby the United States would come to the aid of any NATO country which was attacked? And will he impress on President Trump that we will do everything that we can to encourage other NATO allies to contribute more to the costs of defence?
Yes, 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 and more yes, and thank you to the Right Honourable Gentleman for highlighting this very, very important issue. The NATO alliance is the strongest and best alliance that the modern world has seen, and of course the UK will continue to impress that point on anyone who will listen.
Raheem Downey.
With the upcoming audit into the UK's relationship with China, how does the Foreign Secretary plan to strike a balance between economic growth and growing security concerns with China's dominance in critical national infrastructure, including Chinese-made IoT modules?
Very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for raising this question. It was important in coming to government that we conducted a China audit right across Whitehall to look at the range of relationships. Underpinning that are the 3 Cs, that we will cooperate with China where we can, we will compete with China where we should, and we will challenge China where we must.
Cleverly.
What conversations did the Foreign Secretary have with the Defence Secretary about the diplomatic implications of scrapping key military capabilities such as HMS Albion and Bulwark, and a failure to set a timeline for 2.5% of defence spending?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman knows I've got huge respect for him, but can I just say on the issue of defence spending, that's a little bit rich, given the drop that we saw under the last government. The Prime Minister just last week indicated that we'll set that out in due course. I'm pleased that the Defence Secretary, in coming to power, set about a strategic defence review, which is something that should have been done, frankly, under the last government.
Trina Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Foreign Secretary agree with me
with me that Iran's support for Russia's war in Ukraine is a direct threat to Europe's security, and can he outline what steps he has taken to respond?
Well, I'm very grateful for the question. We are deeply concerned by Iran's malign behaviour. The transfer of ballistic missiles to Ukraine was escalatory. That's why I sanctioned Iran Air. That's why I've sanctioned Iran shipping. I will continue to speak to the foreign minister in Iran about these issues, and clearly we are very concerned about any attempts by Iran to get nuclear capability.
Stephen Gathins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Scotland's international brand is used to boost our economy throughout the world, selling Scottish products and experiences and boost our soft power. So can the Foreign Secretary tell us, how's his department marking St Andrew's Day on Saturday?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to be able to take this question as one of many Scots in the House. We're incredibly proud of Brand Scotland. Our Scottish Secretary has been driving that forward, really pushing the case for Scotland's place in the world, working as part of the UK, and we will most certainly be celebrating it. Certainly I will. Thank you.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Action for Humanity research conducted within Gaza revealed that 53% of respondents already received no humanitarian aid during so-called evacuations. And there are fears that the Knesset's vote to sever ties with UNRWA is likely to reduce access to aid even further. The Minister's already referenced representations that have been made, but what specific immediate actions will the Secretary undertake to reinforce the UN's multilateral framework and the Israeli government's obligations under international law to ensure that sufficient aid reaches civilians in Gaza?
I've got to get colleagues in. These are topicals. They're meant to be short and punchy. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We absolutely recognise the impact of sometimes repeated displacements on the population, up to 9 times in some cases. We've used every opportunity to make clear the essential role of UN, including UNRWA, in Gaza. Thank you.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that the ICC's decision does nothing to help secure the release of hostages, deliver more aid into Gaza, or deliver a sustainable end to the war in the Middle East?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I set out to this House yesterday afternoon, the ICC is the primary method of accountability for war crimes. It should be supported across the whole House. Our support for the ICC does not limit the actions we take in relation to the other issues. We've talked about hostages already this morning, and indeed the vital importance of a ceasefire. We will continue to...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his leadership in tackling and sanctioning those aiding and abetting the illegal invasion of Ukraine? But what more can we do to tackle the wider issue of corruption and kleptocracy that defines Putin's cronies?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend, and he served on Haringey before taking up his place in this House, so we are good friends over many years. He's right to raise this issue. We said that illicit finance would be a priority. It will be a priority. I hope to make further announcements on the back of the sanctions announcements that I made this week.
Mundell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With World AIDS Day approaching, I'm sure the whole House will agree the impact that the Global Fund has had on tackling HIV and AIDS globally. With a replenishment next year, will ministers commit to the UK continuing to make a significant contribution to the Global Fund?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, both for his question and the leadership that he has shown on this issue, as well as others across the House. The UK is determined to see successful replenishments for all of the health-related funds, and we just announced, for example, with the WHO, that we were definitely going to do that just this week. Thank you.
Liz MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Innovation plays a key role in tackling hunger. Can the Minister expand on what efforts we are taking to tackle hunger and how we are supporting innovators like Alora, based at Norwich Research Park, who are using revolutionary technology to create the world's first ocean agriculture system?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for raising this. We have incredible facilities in Norwich working on agricultural innovation. They're important, of course, for global food production, but also very important for UK farmers, whose research is used. The research is used intensively by our local farmers as well as those globally. Thank you.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's ridiculous that Britain should even contemplate taking some of the 61 Sri Lankan asylum seekers on Diego Garcia as part of its
agreement with Mauritius, there are serious concerns in Whitehall that some of those Sri Lankans have criminal records. There are allegations that some of them may be involved in child abuse. I've raised this with the Home Office to no avail. Can ministers in the Foreign Office make sure that all records are checked in Sri Lanka and in Diego Garcia and make sure that no such criminals or abusers are allowed to Britain?
Can shorten up.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government inherited a situation involving Tamil migrants from India and Sri Lanka who arrived there. We're delivering a solution that protects migrants' welfare but avoids opening a new dangerous migration route, and very much the concerns he raised in relation to safeguarding and any other issues are absolutely at the heart of that and are being dealt with by Home Office and other ministerial colleagues.
Tracy Gilbert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will share my concern at the increasing number of women being given death sentences by the Iranian authorities. What urgent representations will my right honourable friend make to the Iranian government to overturn these death sentences and ensure women receive a fair trial?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure my honourable friend that Her Majesty's Ambassador to Iran will continue to raise this appalling issue directly with Iranian officials in Tehran. Furthermore, the UK was instrumental in the delivery of the Iran Human Rights Resolution, which was adopted last week at the UN Third Committee, which called on Iran to establish a moratorium on executions and to end reprisals against women human rights defenders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has indicated that it would arrest the democratically elected Prime Minister of Israel. Doing so would be a contradiction of an act of Parliament and a breach of state and diplomatic immunity. Can the Foreign Secretary tell the House whether he believes compliance with the ICC decision is setting a precedent for future decisions of a similar nature, and is he not concerned that he is contradicting international norms?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we dealt with this question at some exhaustive length yesterday, so let me repeat the answer. The Shadow Attorney General has written on the question, Mr. Speaker, of which elements of international law are most properly followed in this case, and the Attorney General has set out to respond, though we would suspect that this would be a case that would go to the courts in the usual way.
My constituent, the British citizen Jimmy Lai, is in failing health now, and can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his work and all of the work of his department in upholding his rights under international law. Can the Foreign Secretary share with us his assessment of the scale of international support for the release of Jimmy Lai?
Foreign Secretary.
Massive is probably the word that I would put. In America, it's being raised right across the European Union. It's being raised, and of course, we are raising it. His trial has begun. He's now well into his 70s, and that's why I made the case to the Chinese that he should be released. This is becoming cruel and unusual punishment, frankly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The International Criminal Court have confirmed what we have all known for months, that the Israeli government, under the leadership of Benjamin Netanyahu, has unleashed a concerted campaign of crimes against humanity on innocent Palestinian civilians. This is no longer a question of which side you are on, of who is right and wrong. It is cold, hard legal facts, and we cannot allow it. Can the Secretary of State assure us that the government is considering appropriate action against Netanyahu and Gallant to properly hold them to account?
Minister, too long.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can assure my honourable friend that the UK government intends to stand by its international obligations in relation to the ICC and in relation to many other things as well.
Jim Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After the issuing of the arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, can the Foreign Secretary confirm when will the government impose the scale of sanctions on Israel, not just individuals, that the government rightly imposed on Russia after the ICC arrest warrant against Putin? Because a war crime is a war crime, and arrest warrants and arrest warrants, all lives are equal. We must ensure there can be no accusations of double standards.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I hope it has been clear since we became the government in July how important questions of international law are to us, how soberly we treat these issues, and how we ensure that in all matters, including in relation to the ICC cases that my honourable friend describes, that we follow due process, and that is what we intend to do in relation to the ICC.
Final question, Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The civil war in Sudan is estimated to have killed around 150,000 people and displaced 14 million. UNICEF and the UN World Food Programme say that unless efforts are stepped up, more than 70,000 children are projected to suffer acute malnutrition. So can the Minister tell us what steps the UK is taking as the UN penholder to end this malnutrition and support the Sudanese?
Minister.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising this. Very recently, the Foreign Secretary co-led a resolution on the protection of civilians in Sudan. Unfortunately, despite 14 votes in favour, Russia vetoed that resolution. We will continue to push on these issues, and we have doubled our aid to Sudan because of the dreadful crisis there. Thank you.
Completes question. Point of order, Stephen Gettins.
Thank you for granting this point of order, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, earlier on, my honourable friend, the member for Argyll and Butes, raised a very serious case of the detention of Ala Abdel Fattah, whose family are with us in the chamber today. When he raised the case of this British passport holder, the Foreign Secretary told the member that he has a problem with having a British passport. Now, there are members in this House who've got very different views about the constitutional future of this country, be they from Scotland, Ireland or Wales. But will, Mr. Speaker, you reassure me and my colleagues that regardless of our views about the future, everybody who holds a British passport has the right to be stuck up for by their Member of Parliament?
I don't know whether the Foreign Secretary wants to just answer quickly.
Well, I confirm, of course, everybody with a British passport has the right to representation. I would hope that we're the kind of country that supports all sorts of people in trouble, whatever their background, who are in our country.
Yeah. Right, let us move on. Let the front benches change over. We now come to the Statement, Secretary of State for Energy and Security, Ed Miliband.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by taking this opportunity to extend my sympathy to all those affected by Storm Bert? It has been a devastating event for people in different parts of our country, particularly in Wales, and my heart goes out to the families of those who have lost their lives and all those whose lives have been disrupted. I also, with your permission, Mr. Speaker, want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to Lord Prescott. He was a fighter for social justice. He was a champion of the environment. He rightfully has global recognition for his role in negotiating the Kyoto Protocol, and he showed how politics can change lives for the better. I send my deepest condolences to Pauline and his family. Mr. Speaker, with permission, I would like to make a statement about Cop29. The UK attended Cop29 to fight for our national interest, speeding up the clean energy transition in the interest of jobs, energy security and economic growth, and tackling the climate crisis for today's and future generations. In Baku, our message was clear. Britain is back in the business of global climate leadership. Because we know the impacts of the climate crisis know no borders. We've already seen the extreme impacts we can face here in Britain, and we know that if we do not act, these impacts will get much, much worse. That's why, as the Prime Minister said at COP29, there is no national security without climate security. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, it is precisely because Britain represents only around 1% of annual global emissions that we have to work with others to ensure the remaining 99% of emissions are addressed to protect the British people. Now, the focus of this COP was on finance for developing countries, because the reality is that unless we persuade developing countries to go down the clean energy development path, we cannot hope to reduce emissions and prevent climate disaster. These countries face the triple challenges of needing to invest in the clean energy transition, coping with the costs of climate vulnerability, and needing to develop to take their populations out of poverty. At the same time, developed countries, including Britain, face extreme pressure on our public finances. The COP talks are always complex, but these circumstances made this set of talks particularly so. And I want to put on record my thanks to our outstanding team of civil servants who supported me at COP. I was repeatedly struck by the enormous respect they have from so many countries around the world. The UK's negotiating team was led by Alison Campbell, who is leaving to go to work with the UN Secretary-General. And I want to put on record my special thanks to her in helping us to reach an agreement. The agreement reached is to provide and mobilise at least $300 billion of climate finance by 2035 for developing countries. Much of this will come from the multilateral development banks like the World Bank, who have stepped up to set a target to substantially increase the climate finance they provide. Importantly, for the first time, the agreement reflects a new global landscape where traditional donors will be joined by big emitters like China to help finance the transition. This is fair and it is right. The UK will decide what our own contribution will be in the context of our own spending review and fiscal situation, and it will come, of course, from within the UK aid budget. I can inform the House that if delivered with the same impact as UK climate finance, the $300 billion deal could lead to emissions reductions which are the equivalent to more than 15 times the UK's annual emissions, as well as helping to protect up to 1 billion people in developing countries from the effects of floods, heat waves and droughts. And crucially, this agreement will accelerate the global clean energy transition, which offers the prospect of export and economic opportunities here in Britain. So let nobody be in any doubt, Mr. Speaker, this agreement is absolutely in our national interest. Now, in other aspects, the talks were more disappointing. At Cop28, the world made a historic agreement to transition away from fossil fuels. That agreement stands, but we did not reach agreement this year on how to take this commitment forward. Not because the text put forward was too ambitious, but because it wasn't ambitious enough. In particular, many developing countries, including the small island states, felt the text put forward was just inadequate to the scale of the climate emergency. Developed countries, including Britain, agreed with this view. And, Mr. Speaker, this offers an important lesson. Under this government, Britain is part of a global coalition for ambitious climate action that spans global north and global south, the global centre ground of climate politics. And we will now seek to build on the agreement at COP30 next year in Brazil. At this COP, the UK also made important announcements on countering deforestation, scaling up private finance and nuclear cooperation as part of the clean energy transition. And the Prime Minister announced our nationally determined contribution to reduce emissions by at least 81% by 2035 compared to 1990 levels. This follows the advice we received from the Independent Climate Change Committee. Let me be clear, Mr. Speaker, this target is right for Britain, for energy security, for good jobs and growth. On the same day as the announcement, Scottish Power and Siemens announced a £1 billion deal to invest in wind manufacturing in Hull, boosting British manufacturing and supporting 1,300 good jobs in our industrial heartlands, showing what the clean energy mission can do for Britain and building on the steps this government has already taken. Lifting the onshore wind ban, consenting nearly 2 gigawatts of solar, setting up Great British Energy, delivering a record-breaking renewables auction, kick-starting our carbon capture and hydrogen industries, and driving towards cheaper, cleaner heating through our Warm Homes plan. And, Mr. Speaker, it is in our national interest to use the power of our example to work with others to speed up the clean energy transition globally. Just as the 2008 Climate Change Act, supported across this House, inspired others to follow our lead. That's why at the G20 in Brazil, the Prime Minister launched the Global Clean Power Alliance to drive forward this transition along with a number of other countries. But, Mr. Speaker, this is just the start of the work we need to do in the run-up to COP30 to make next year's talks a success. Because the truth is that despite progress over the last 2 weeks, the truth is we are halfway through the decisive decade for limiting warming to 1.5 degrees, and the world is way off track. Other countries like Brazil have also announced ambitious NDCs, and in the months ahead we will continue to push others to go further and faster in raising ambition, in scaling up finance, in protecting nature and forests, and in driving forward the clean energy transition. Let me end by saying this. The COP process is tortuous and progress is too slow. However, this government believes that while multilateralism, in other words, cooperating with others, is hard, it is the only way to truly fight for Britain. Those who say we should disengage from these negotiations and step off the stage would let down our country, deprive us of a voice, and leave future generations paying the price. Despite all the difficulties, at COP29, one truth was overwhelmingly clear. The global transition away from fossil fuels and towards clean energy is happening, and it is unstoppable. Unstoppable because clean energy is the route to energy security. Unstoppable because it is the economic opportunity of our time, and unstoppable because people in Britain and around the world can see the climate crisis is here, and unless we act, things will only get worse. In less than 5 months, this government has shown we will seize the opportunities of speeding up at home, and we have demonstrated climate leadership abroad to deliver energy independence, lower bills, good jobs, economic growth and the security of a stable climate. Doing all we can, Mr. Speaker, to keep the British people safe now and for generations to come, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State, Clerk Coutinho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. I echo his comments on Stormbird and thank the emergency services for all they've done to help those in need. And I also want to start by passing on my personal condolences to the Right Honourable Gentleman on the passing of John Prescott. I know he wanted him to lead the Paris Accords in 2015, having admired his work in Kyoto. And I believe he described John as someone who could bash heads together at the time. So I hope, as the Secretary of State's opposite number, I can achieve some of that head bashing that he so clearly valued in John. So, Mr. Speaker, in that vein, the Secretary of State has talked a lot about regaining global leadership, but I fear that he's stuck in 2009. He may not want to acknowledge this, but for the past 14 years, we've been a global leader. We are the only major economy, the only one to have halved carbon emissions since 1990. In that same time, America's emissions have stayed the same and China's have tripled. However, what we have seen is that countries are not persuaded just because Britain is going further and faster. They're persuaded by prosperity and they're persuaded by living standards. We are 1% of global emissions, and if he continues down the path he set out, I fear that our country will face hardship and there'll be no point in being world leading because nobody will want to follow our lead. He would make us a warning, not an example to others. So let's start with what he announced at COP. The Secretary of State has set out a new target to cut our greenhouse gas emissions by 81% by 2035. However, what we didn't hear in his statement is how much this will cost the British people. The Independent Climate Change Committee say that this target would require people to eat less meat and dairy, take fewer flights, swap their boilers for heat pumps and their petrol cars for EVs at a pace that will require taxes and mandation. Even the chair of the Select Committee has acknowledged people will be forced to change their lives. But the Secretary of State says not to worry. He'll deliver all the savings through energy policy, and those plans will lead to higher growth, cutting bills, creating jobs and strengthening national security. But none of those things are true when it comes to his plans. The Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies has already said that his climate plans won't lead to growth. The National Energy System Operators Report showed that his rush for Clean Power 2030 is going to add eye-watering costs to our energy system. And despite those very expensive costs, it would still leave gas pricing the system around 50% of the time, or would leave the equivalent of millions of homes in the dark waiting for the wind to blow. I don't think that's anybody's idea of energy or national security. But, Mr. Speaker, he doesn't have to take my word for it. The head of offshore wind development at RWE, one of the country's largest wind developers, has warned that the Right Honourable Gentleman's rush to meet his 2030 target will lead to price spikes, with consumers losing out. The chief executive of Octopus has warned about the £6 billion of costs that consumers will have to pay because the Right Honourable Gentleman wants to build renewables without reforming the grid. And the former head of MI6 has warned that the Secretary of State, and I quote, this is worth listening to because it's their former head of MI6. The former head of MI6 has said, and I quote, that the Secretary of State is pursuing completely crazy energy policy when it comes to national security. And when it comes to jobs, his plans to make our energy expensive and unreliable will see jobs fleeing to more polluting countries because it's cheap energy and innovation which matter in the race for jobs. And you only need to ask China, which dominates clean tech supply chains and is the world's largest polluter. That's where billions of pounds of our taxpayers' money will be going to pay for his rush transition, from our country with all the investment it has made into clean power to a country still 60% powered by coal. Low growth, high bills, jobs lost, even blackouts, for more carbon in the atmosphere, Mr. Speaker. That's the opposite of what he's been promising. And in Baku, while he was signing us up to these targets without talking about what they will do for life for British people, he was also signing away billions of pounds of taxpayers' money. He signed us up to a $300 billion annual climate finance target, and I'm afraid it's not credible to say that taxpayers won't have to pay more, and they deserve to know by how much. So can he tell us today what that new target will mean for British taxpayers? And I think, considering the increase in the target, the public will rightly question why countries like Russia, and particularly China, now the world's largest polluter and second largest by historical standards, will not be obliged to pay a penny. I think he tried to insist that they would, but it's very clear that they will not be obliged at all to pay in. Whilst Britain, which has invested billions in cutting its own emissions and is only 1% of global emissions, will have to pay more. Well, he also set out an assessment on the increased reliance on coal-powered Chinese imports for his 2030 zero-carbon plans and what that means for global emissions. Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State is not being honest with the British public. He promised them £300 of their energy bills by 2030, but just weeks ago he whipped his Labour MPs to vote that pledge down. He took away the winter fuel payment despite promising the elderly would be looked after under his energy policy. And he's now saying he can achieve higher climate targets in a way that's zero cost to the public. This is not a recipe for climate leadership, Mr. Speaker. It's a recipe for higher bills and lost jobs, and it will be a disaster for the British public.
Can I just say, just to remind from benches, is 5 minutes. Okay. Secretary of State.
Oh dear, oh dear. Okay, let me deal with her questions such as they are, Mr. Speaker. Let's start with our nationally determined contribution announced at COP. It's so interesting that she now opposes this, because the 2035 NDC, announced by the Prime Minister, is exactly the target her government legislated for in 2021 in the 6th carbon budget, which covers 2035, which means she is now opposing, Mr. Speaker, the very same target her government put into law. And she claimed that she was working towards as Secretary of State just a few months ago. And, Mr. Speaker, there is a pattern here. Every week, the Right Honourable Lady takes to Twitter to express her latest outrage about a policy, asking who on earth could support this. And every week, someone pops up in her replies and says politely, "You did, just a few months back." Because this isn't the only one, Mr. Speaker. Last week she came out against the clean heat market mechanism, another policy she proposed. In fact, I have what she says, no, I have a statement from her from only 8 months ago, where she said it will be coming in, the clean heat market mechanism, in April 2025, exactly what this government is doing. And the truth is, Mr. Speaker, any passing bandwagon, and she'll leap on it, even if it means trashing her record. And let me give her a little lesson about opposition. The job of opposition is to oppose the government, not to oppose yourself. And this is where she has ended up. And so out of the window goes any commitment to climate action, ignoring the fact it's the route to energy security, good jobs and lower bills, ignoring the fact it's backed by business, ignoring the fact that this country has an honourable tradition of a bipartisan consensus. I'm happy to say that the last government proposed some ambitious targets, that COP26 was an important milestone for the world. And the truth is about this, is it's not just irresponsible. It's not just crass opportunism. It's also actually what helped take the Conservative Party down to their worst election defeat in 200 years. So it's not going to work for her. Now, let me tell her what the Clean Energy Superpower Mission means for Britain. It means cleaning up our power system so we don't leave the country exposed as they did to fossil fuels. It means new jobs in carbon capture and storage as we decarbonise industry and reindustrialise. It means energy efficiency in homes, meaning lower bills, warmer homes and lower emissions. And as for the NISO report that she talks about, I know it's deeply disappointing to her, but we've got an independent report that says the following. First of all, 2030 is achievable. She said it wasn't. It also says it will give us energy security, which she says it wouldn't give us. and it says that it can lead to lower electricity, something she constantly denied. The truth about the Right Honourable Lady is that she's got nothing to say about the COP. It's basically the Conservative Party is stop the world, I want to get off. Well, stop the world, I want to get off is going to do nothing for the British people. The truth is she's got a lot to learn, and I'm afraid she needs to start reflecting. She needs to start reflecting on where her government went wrong, and it went wrong in many different ways, and she seems to be learning no lessons.
The lesson, Chair of the Select Committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I just say very gently say to the Shadow Secretary of State, she really shouldn't believe dodgy headlines in the Daily Telegraph. In fact, I don't know if there are headlines in the Daily Telegraph that are ever not dodgy based on what she was quoting there. But more importantly, can I congratulate the Prime Minister on his leadership at COP? And can I congratulate the Secretary of State on leading the negotiations, not least in delivering the £300 billion of climate finance for developing countries. Can I ask him, though, he set out this country's achievements since the general election. Can I ask him then, to what extent does he think that the combination of what this country showed at COP and what we've delivered at home since the 4th of July will encourage countries around the world to play their part in addressing the climate crisis?
My honourable friend asked a really important question. I think there are two truths that you take out of COP, which is one, that the transition is unstoppable, and secondly, that it is not going fast enough. But it is such a difference than it was a decade ago. And my honourable friend who was there with me, I think, is nodding in agreement, because every country knows that the climate crisis is happening and affecting them. And the testimony you hear, it's like the testimony we could provide about what people are seeing. So they know that they have to act. Every country faces constraints in acting, but they also know, and this is the big change from a decade ago, that it is massively in their economic interest, that there is a race on for the good jobs of the future, and the clean energy transition can provide them.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Ross Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Cop29 has concluded with a deal that, while welcome, leaves much to be desired. I must stress that we need bolder, more decisive action if we're to face the greatest challenge of our time, the climate crisis. I know that the Right Honourable Gentleman's heart is in the right place and has been for many years. We first met in the run-up to the Cop15 in 2009. And I would like to express my thanks to him for his staunch leadership in the intervening years. I would also like to express Lib Dem's support for a brave programme of action going forward, and our willingness to work with his department to help the UK step up and seize this opportunity for climate leadership. While we welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to ambitious emissions targets for 2035, commitments alone are not enough. Immediate action is needed to insulate homes, reduce energy costs, and ensure that no one has to choose between heating and eating. The delay to Labour's Warm Homes Plan until spring 2025 is unacceptable when millions, including 1.2 million pensioners, face a cold and unaffordable winter due to the cut in the winter fuel allowance. In my constituency of the South Cotswolds and all across the UK, we've seen firsthand the devastating effects of climate change, and never more so than over the last few days, with floods and storms becoming more frequent and more severe. Towns and villages in my constituency, such as Purton, Great Somerford and Cirencester, have been severely affected by flooding, and we need urgent action now to both mitigate climate change and help our communities adapt to the likely impacts now and in the future. I would also like to take this opportunity to associate myself with the thanks already expressed to the brave men and women of our emergency services in the aftermath of Storm Bert. Climate leadership must prioritise solutions that protect communities and restore nature. Natural flood defences like wetlands. My apologies, I thought I had 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Better instruction.
May I finish with a question? Will the Secretary of State commit to including natural flood defences as a central part of the £5.2 billion flood defence spending, ensuring that communities like those in the South Cotswolds are better protected from the worsening impacts of climate change while also addressing biodiversity loss?
Secretary of State.
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady for her questions and for her support for ambitious action, which is important. I think, let me pick out a couple of points that she made. Look, the first in particular on the way in which the devastating effects of climate are already apparent. It's such an important point. And in a way, I think part of the danger, Mr. Speaker, is that they end up being the new normal, and we just think this is part of life. Now, in some sense, it is part of life, and we need, as she said, the right flood defences in place and so on. But we also need to realise that these effects will get worse, significantly worse, if we do not act, and future generations will, frankly, hold us in infamy if they say, well, you knew about the scale of the devastation, you'd seen a preview of what was to come, and you decided you couldn't act. So I think she's absolutely right about that. Secondly, let me just sort of gently correct her on the Warm Homes Plan. We're getting on with the Warm Homes Plan. Indeed, announcements were made last week about actions which will help over 300,000 families to benefit from homes upgrades next year, announcements around heat pumps, a whole range of announcements to help families do better and be able to lower their energy bills. Let me just make one other point, which I think was part of what she was saying, which is this is a climate crisis and it's also a nature crisis. It's a climate and biodiversity crisis. And if there was another issue that I think could have been made more of at COP and was a bit disappointing, it was that nature part of the agenda didn't get maybe the attention it deserved. And I think that is very, very important for COP30 in Brazil.
Right, Chair of the Environmental Audit, Toby Perkins.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. No one can doubt the leadership that my right honourable friend and the Prime Minister showed in Baku, and he deserves great credit for that. But I think he's right to say there is a danger in overselling the achievements of this COP. The developing nations have been very critical, actually, about the financial agreement that was reached and on the commitments that were made in Paris on fossil fuels, as he said, were not followed through. Can he spell out what he sees as the main barriers right now to getting the action that we need and the pace of action that he needs, and whether he has any confidence that at Rio we will see the real breakthrough that the world is waiting for?
Well, he sort of asked absolutely the right question, Mr. Speaker. Look, I think the truth on the finance side is that this does represent a significant scaling up at a time when developed countries and developing countries face extreme pressure on the public finances. Just to say there is a significant development here, which is that the flows to the multilateral development banks from developing countries or large emitters rather like China will now count towards the overall finance goal. That is a big change and a big step forward. On the question of the transition away from fossil fuels, look, the barrier is that countries, some countries are worried about what it means for them. That's totally understandable. Some countries think this will be problematic for their prosperity, and the truth is we're just going to have to make better efforts to ensure that the majority of countries that do want to see action prevail at next year's COP, and that is going to be hard yards. And also, finally, we must have a campaign, and this is something we'll work on with Brazil, for ambitious NDCs, because that is crucial at this moment. That is the job of the next COP.
David Munday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend to the Secretary of State the UK Small Islands Development State Strategy report, which was produced by the International Development Committee just before Parliament was dissolved by the general election. And a key focus of that report is the need to support these island states, not just at COP, but all the time in terms of the UK being an advocate for their needs and requirements across the international community.
Well, the right honourable gentleman is absolutely right. He speaks with customary eloquence on this issue. This is literally an existential issue for the small island states. And their testimony at COP is compelling and deeply distressing. And that's why the finance deal is important. It's not everything they wanted, but it's a step forward.
Polly Billington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's statement today and the agreement reached at COP29 in Baku. He and I go back a long way on COPs and we know what it's like when it goes wrong. But particularly, I would welcome the nationally determined contribution to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 2035 by 81%. Does he agree with me that the fundamental reason why we have leadership on the global stage now, as distinct from what we've had for the last 14 years, is not just because of the target, but because we have a plan? This COP was supposed to be about implementation, and where we lead in implementation, others will follow.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. She was with me at Copenhagen, and I definitely had sort of Copenhagen PTSD at these talks at various moments in the middle of the night. On this point about the target and the action, it's absolutely right. And I think there is global recognition that this government has upped the pace in the whole multiple ways that I described in my statement, and that is incredibly important. And that is also important because business sees it happening, and business then thinks Britain is a country that is clear about its direction, and we will invest there.
Stefan Correll.
Yeah, I can only speak for North Norfolk, but I can say that a green energy future is an exciting future for our local economy, especially at Bacton. But just along the coast, villages like Haysborough are suffering from being part of the fastest eroding coastline in Europe. He's touched on coastal erosion in answer to my honourable friend, but can I push him? Specifically, how will the outcomes of COP29 reassure my residents who are worried about losing their homes to coastal erosion now?
Well, as far as COP29 is concerned, speeding up global action. And, you know, when I described in my statement what this finance deal could mean, something like the equivalent of 15 times the emissions of Britain reduction, you know, this is hard going, but that is the way that we reduce the temperature rises that are going to take place. You know, the world is in danger of busting through 1.5 degrees and going beyond that, and that's why the action is so urgent, and that's why this finance deal really matters.
Jim McAllister.
Two times. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I strongly welcome the Secretary of State's signing of a new UK-US Advanced Nuclear Technology Agreement at COP. And I'd like to ask the Secretary of State to share a little bit more of the details of that agreement, and also whether he agrees with me that it could form the basis for a much more ambitious agreement between the UK and US on civil nuclear development.
Well, this was an important agreement, and I'm glad my honourable friend has drawn attention to it. This is about the next generation of nuclear power stations, and the truth is about this is that, and it goes across clean energy in nuclear, in renewables and elsewhere, that global cooperation, bilateral cooperation, we can learn so much from each other, we can work with each other, we can work with US companies and UK companies, and there can be huge benefits right across the country.
Rebecca Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Thursday, the Prime Minister implied that the new wind energy project in Hull would result in lower energy bills for my constituents in South West Devon. He refused to say when by, though. So when can my constituents and others across the country expect to see the Labour Party's promised £300 reduction in their bills?
If she reads the NISO report, which is the advice given to us from the independent body, they show that this will lead to lower electricity bills. And this is so important because there's two protections that we get from Clean Power 2030. One is lower bills, and secondly, we are protected against the devastating price spikes that affected her constituents during the gas price crisis of 2022.
Clive Atherton.
Speaker, when I consider this sort of issue, I tend to think of my grandchildren and what the world is going to be like for them in years to come. And I listen to my right honourable friend and the achievements that we have made over the last 5 months. And then I listen to the response from the party opposite, and it fills me with horror. Yeah. In spite of what my right honourable friend says, there was tough negotiations at this COP. And he has to be congratulated for the role that he played in achieving the agreements that we got there. Yeah. How essential does he believe it is that we continue with that leadership going forwards when we consider what could have happened if the Conservatives had stayed in power.
Look, I think where my honourable friend is right is that, look, we obviously have party political disagreement on issues, but one thing that this country has avoided is the situation that has taken place in some other countries, which is a fraying and indeed a splitting of this consensus. And the reason why the consensus on climate action is so important is precisely for the reasons that my honourable friend set out, which is the fate of his grandchildren, all of our future generations, and the impact on them. So, I want to work with people across parties on this issue, because the more of a consensus we can have, the better it is for the country.
Paula Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Low-income countries were extremely disappointed by the finance agreements at COP. $300 billion does not come anywhere near the level of need. And critically, there was no clarity on how much would be grants as opposed to loans, which will plunge Global South countries further into debt. So does the Secretary of State share my concern about the potential dominance of loans and an over-reliance on the private sector? And does he agree with me that considerable public finance could and should be raised through taxes on the most polluting companies?
Well, look, I understand why the Honourable Lady expresses that disappointment. Indeed, some developing countries, a number of developing countries express that disappointment. I would say to her that I think this is a considerable scaling up. I mean, to state the obvious, because the 100 billion was the previous commitment, a considerable scaling up of the resources. It is the provision and mobilisation of resources. She's right about the balance between grants and loans, and also the funds that are required for adaptation. But the truth is that public finance on its own is never going to meet the need. That's why the agreement on carbon markets that was part of this COP is important, and that's why the mobilisation of private finance and working on a roadmap to that mobilisation of private finance, part of the agreement too, is so important.
Sally James.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Secretary of State's statement today? And acknowledge that the UK is very lucky to have unique resources which put us at the forefront of the energy transition. And would he also acknowledge that industrial heartlands like our own in Doncaster were frankly let down by the last government with promise after promise, announcement after announcement, and no delivery? So will he set out what the Labour government are going to do to back British industry and, more importantly, coalfields like our own?
Well, my honourable friend and neighbour is absolutely right about this, and this is where the opportunities are huge. For South Yorkshire, the opportunities around hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, the jobs in insulating homes. This is, we know that what many of our industrial heartlands have been crying out for is good jobs at good wages, and they've been crying out for them for a long time. This is the opportunity to make them happen.
James Wilde.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. COP leaders agreed to triple climate finance to £300 billion a year. The Secretary of State referred to the spending review in his statement, but he signed up, the Prime Minister signed up to this international commitment. He must know how much the UK is going to have to pay. Will he tell the House?
That's not the way it works. The way it works is that we set a global total, and then it's for individual countries to come forward with their contributions. That's the way it works.
Joyce Fenton Glenn.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome my honourable friend's statement today. My constituency is at the mercy of climate change, as this weekend's flood showed. And hearing the opposition fail to grasp that urgency is deeply frustrating for many of my constituents. Correct. And while we're on the front line of climate change's impact, we also want to be on the front line of the response. And that's why many in my constituency welcome the Warm Homes Plan. Could the member update me what he's doing to make sure we bring forward a workforce to deliver that that Warm Homes Plan, particularly in constituencies like mine, which have got quite hard houses to retrofit?
Well, I think my honourable friend makes a really, really important point, and we are working through my department, the Office of Clean Energy Jobs, with Skills England, to make sure that we have that workforce plan, because there's huge job opportunities here. We need to make sure we have the workforce plan. We need to have to make sure that people have the assurance that the work is going to be properly regulated and that they can expect high standards. This is a massive national mission for the country, and we'll be coming forward with more proposals on this in the coming months.
Dave Dugan.
Mr Speaker, we learned from the Minister's statement three things. The first one is that the climate finance will come from the existing UK aid budget. Can the Minister reassure the House that the increase in the UK aid budget will be greater than the amount that's gone on climate finance, so that we can be confident that we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul in the developed world? And important agreements on deforestation. Does this mean that the UK will stop spending almost £11 billion on subsidies to burn trees in England to generate electricity? Is that one of the important elements about deforestation he talked about? And he claims in the statement that GB Energy is set up. Can he tell us where we can go and see it?
Thanks so much for the support. Let me deal with his questions in turn. It's always been the case that climate finance is part of the aid budget. This is not some new announcement that I've made, and obviously that is a decision that we make along with the Foreign Office and other colleagues across government about the right balance of resources and where the greatest need lies. As for GB Energy, he knows it's going to be headquartered in Aberdeen, and we are getting on with setting it up. We have a start-up chair in Jürgen and GB Energy is ploughing ahead. We've only been in office less than 5 months. The legislation is going through, and it will happen. His second question, I think, was about Drax. The last government issued a consultation on that, and we'll be responding in the months ahead.
Richard Berg.
Speaker, the Secretary of State was absolutely right to say at the close of the climate talks that the only way to keep the British people safe from extreme weather and economic disruption is to ensure the world acts together. That requires funding. It's clear the COP at Azerbaijan didn't deliver that at the scale needed. The Make Polluters Pay coalition is calling for the big oil companies worldwide that have made grotesque profits whilst driving the climate crisis to fund the required investments at home and abroad. Isn't that the fair way to secure the finance needed?
Look, we've obviously got to look at all of these issues. These global levies and taxes are always quite complex and difficult things to make happen. We have said that we will support the idea of the maritime levy, but I think we need to sort of proceed cautiously on these issues because, frankly, I think what's important is that the finance is provided. But these are discussions that we will obviously engage in the months ahead.
John Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As champions of the North Sea, the previous government underpinned 200,000 jobs right across the UK. What then does the Secretary of State say to OE UK, who say that the government's energy tax has stripped out something around £13 billion of investment in the North Sea, money that won't be recovered by the anaemic and frankly invisible GB Energy?
Well, look, we just disagree on the idea that we shouldn't have taxed the unearned profits of the energy companies, which was paid for direct by the British people. And I have to say to the honourable gentleman, if he wants to say that we should not have had a windfall tax on the oil and gas companies, I think he's way out of line with his constituents.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Walthamstow are very proud that one of our own, Samia Dumbaya, was one of the Future Leaders Network working with the UK Youth Climate Coalition at Baku. I know that the Secretary of State will agree with me that young people need to be at the heart of what comes next following COP, and they welcome the proposed NDCs, but they now need a direct and dedicated place in making those happen. So can you tell us what formal mechanism for the oversight and delivery of the reduction by 81% of emissions by 2035 does he envisage for the young people of the UK?
I think my honourable friend asked a really important question, and I met with some of the youth campaigners and youth coalition at COP, and I agreed with them that the UK had signed up to a youth clause in our NDC, which is about recognising young people as agents of change when it comes to climate and the need to engage with young people. And I would love to talk to her and those young people about how we take those issues forward in the months ahead.
Sarah Dyke.
I thank the Secretary of State for his statement and agree that the UK must show global leadership on climate action. Peatlands are the largest natural terrestrial carbon store, yet damaged peatlands are responsible for almost 5% of global anthropogenic CO2 emissions. While the UK imports 60% of peat used in horticulture, offshoring carbon emissions abroad, so does the Secretary of State agree with me that beyond COP29, we must continue to show global leadership and protect the environment by committing to a phased ban in peat in horticulture?
Well, look, let me just deal with the wider issue of peatlands, because there was money allocated in the budget for these issues through DEFRA, and that is important. It's a sort of very important issue, and the wider issue there is important. And we also need to make progress at a global level. As to those other issues, they're actually a matter for DEFRA, but I undertake to write to her on those issues.
Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his statement. I was proud of the constructive role that the UK played in the negotiations, representing our country and also some of the poorest people on the planet who are at the absolute front line against climate change, partly due to the emissions from this country. But COP is not without its critics, despite it being the only platform to progress our climate ambitions. So I'd like to ask the Secretary of State how he thinks that the process could be improved, and in particular, what gentle advice he would give to anyone thinking about taking over the presidency of a major world economy early next year.
I'll resist the second half of his question, if you don't mind, Mr. Speaker. But on the first part of the question, look, the COP process does have its critics. I think I'd say a couple of things. First of all, 15 years ago, when I last attended the COP as Secretary of State in Copenhagen, no country was signed up to net zero. Now 90% of the world's GDP is covered by net zero. Now that's not only because of the COP, but that process of international engagement is important, and it's a forcing mechanism to put world leaders on the spot. And secondly, I think the reason it's hard is largely because you've got 198 countries all trying to agree. And that is difficult. So if people can think of improvements to the system, that's great. But I do think that engagement is really important.
Sammy Wilson.
Let me get this straight. The Minister is welcoming a conference to deal with CO2 where the host country tried to use it to sell oil and gas deals, where the major producers of CO2, the leaders of those countries, didn't even bother turning up, where we sent 490 civil servants, flew them out to attend the conference, and where the main topic was how do we extract money from countries who were guilty of the sin of industrialisation. And the Minister has shot out his chest today, saying we're now leaders in global climate. It's hard to be a leader when you have no followers, Minister, that's all I can say. But could I ask a question? How can the Minister face the hard-pressed taxpayers of the United Kingdom who are reeling under the impact of the latest budget and expect them to pay out billions to foreign countries?
Secretary of State.
Well, the honourable gentleman and I have been debating these issues for 15 years, and I hazard a guess that we're not going to end up agreeing. The thing I would say to him gently is the truth about the climate crisis is it is the biggest potential cost that future generations can face. Trillions of costs across the world, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of costs in the UK if we do not act. And you know, all of the evidence is that the costs of acting on climate change are much less than the costs of not acting.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was in Paris 9 years ago when we started the process of negotiation on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. It was only concluded with the gavel going down in Baku. It's an important process ensuring a carbon market through the UNFCCC. How will the UK implement the new Article 6 regulations, and how we support other countries in this important work as we can utilise it for those nature-based solutions like reforestation, afforestation?
Well, I think the honourable gentleman, my honourable friend, makes a really important point, and maybe it's a slight counter to the honourable gentleman who just spoke. You know, this is beneath the headlines. This is where the hard yards of work at COP happened. It's taken 10 years to do these Article 6 negotiations and to complete them. But this is about carbon markets, voluntary carbon markets. In answer to his question, we're consulting on some of the high integrity principles for that. But this, again, will make a difference to developing countries and will get funds flowing to them. And that's another reason why these COPs are worthwhile.
Good job.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State is in consensus building mode. Can I offer him the opportunity to address the 10,975 members of my Spelthorne constituency who are going to be losing their winter fuel payments, or the 100,000 pensioners who are going to be plunged into poverty? Could he explain to them why they're wrong when they see the government taking money from their pocket and in order to be able to have enough money to send overseas?
Well, he is wrong to say this. The truth is that the last government left the public finances in an appalling state. And that is why those decisions were made. And as I've explained, we've agreed a global total when it comes to climate, but UK contributions are a matter for us and our spending reviews and depending on our fiscal situation.
Carl Turner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Doesn't the £1 billion Siemens deal in East Hull go to prove the government's commitment to making the UK a clean energy superpower?
My honourable friend is right about this, and he's been a great champion on these issues. And it does show the opportunities that there are. You know, there are countless opportunities across the world, even, you know, including in relation to this finance deal, because this is going to create huge business opportunities. And the truth is that governments all across the world are alive to these opportunities. I want Britain to win. These jobs are the future.
Andrew Murison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Where's the leadership, and what example does it set to fly 470 officials and delegates halfway across the world to a climate change jamboree, more than any other Western European country? And can the Secretary of State say what the cost has been in terms of carbon and cash?
I mean, I do say to the honourable gentleman that there is a long tradition of civil servants playing a really important role at these COPs. In fact, we sent 100 fewer civil servants to this COP than the last one under the last government. He might be interested to know. But I absolutely defend public servants doing a brilliant job going to these COPs. Why? Because it is absolutely in the British national interest.
John Slinger.
Speaker, echoing the comments of my honourable friend, the member for Walthamstow, would my right honourable friend agree to considering taking a young person, perhaps from a sixth form or a university, along to the next COP meeting as an advisor to remind our delegation, and indeed delegations around the world, that it is their future that is on the table?
Well, there are indeed members of the Youth Climate Coalition who go to these COPs, and I don't want to sort of interfere in their processes for picking those people. But I think the general point he makes about the voice of young people is really important. You know, it is also, they represent young people, but they also represent future generations. And I think hearing the voices of how future generations will regard the actions we do or don't take is incredibly important.
Llynol Smeddy.
Deputy Speaker, despite today's statement noting it in the UK's interest to speed up the clean energy, we still need urgent clarity on clean energy project. Will the Secretary of State finally confirm the government's plan for nuclear at Wilva in my constituency of Ynys-Môn?
Well, we do think that Wilva has very important prospects, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the truth is that there is an important pipeline of nuclear projects that we are moving forward with, and we look forward to discussions in the coming months about Wilva.
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I commend the Secretary of State for his leadership and for his statement today and join his bipartisanship? I am happy to recognise the contributions of Theresa May and Boris Johnson, but it says a lot when it takes Labour members of Parliament to do it, because the Conservative front bench opposite are running so fast and so far away from them.
Yeah.
does the Secretary of State agree with me that clean energy is how we achieve energy security, and energy security is how we achieve national security when our world is in turmoil and this country faces threats like never before?
His second point is absolutely right, and his first point is absolutely right too. I am very happy to acknowledge the role of Theresa May in putting net zero into law, in recognising the role of Alok Sharma, even also in recognising the role of Boris Johnson, who sought to champion some of these issues. It's a real shame, and it speaks volumes, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we can say those things and they don't.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I have to say I do agree with the last speaker who talked about there being no national security without energy security. Because we discovered after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia how dependent the UK was on imported gas. When talking to other countries, did the government make the case for investment in clean energy and how it can reduce dependency on malign petrostates like Russia?
I think the Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right about this. I think Russia's invasion of Ukraine demonstrated to us the truth, which is that, unfortunately, fossil fuels do not give us energy security. Because whether the fossil fuels came from the North Sea or they were imported, prices shot through the roof, and our constituents paid the price, and government paid out £94 billion in support. And that's why our clean energy superpower mission is so important, because to give us the energy security that side completely failed to give us.
Abtisam Mohammed.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend the Energy Secretary's work both here in the UK and for his global leadership at Cop29. Many developing countries continue to face the intensifying effects of the climate crisis. For their sake and for ours, we cannot afford inaction and delay. Can the Secretary of State clarify what specific work will be undertaken to improve the global ambitions so that we can transition away from fossil fuels and keep alive the commitment to keep the world's temperature rise below 1.5?
Well, my honourable friend asked absolutely the right question, and that is the work that we will be undertaking with Brazil and other like-minded countries in the year ahead. The next year marks a very, very important moment where 5 years from the last time the world did this, we have to set targets for 2035, or NDCs for 2035. This is such an important moment because it's the way we need to get back on track for keeping temperature rises down, and we will be we're straining every sinew to work with others to make that happen.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's always a pleasure to hear the Secretary of State committing a strategy and a plan that does look forward, even though we may have some questions in relation to it. My fear, Secretary of State, has always been that the funding that has been granted, and indeed is incredibly substantial, how will the Secretary of State ensure that this huge pot of funding is used to achieve the necessary aims and not siphoned off or lost in the process? I say this bearing in mind that pushing a pen around and making a way through red tape can be a very costly endeavour. That money needs to go to the projects that make a difference. How can this be guaranteed before we allocate any more of our taxpayers' hard-pressed money? Thank you so much.
I think the honourable gentleman raises a really, really important point, which is actually, as much as developing countries were wanting the biggest possible sum in relation to supporting them, they were as worried about the quality of finance as they were about the quantum and their access to funds. Because the thing I heard time and again from developing countries was we wait years and years to actually access the funds that are available. So making sure it's spent on the right things and that it's accessible for those countries is crucial work that now needs to happen in the months and years ahead.
Alistair Strathern.
Deputy Speaker, can I welcome the statement and the leadership this government showed at COP29, recognising that with the global transition well underway, the economic benefits will accrue to those who lead and shape it, rather than those who shy away from it and remain all too passive in the face of the economic forces it heralds. Can the Secretary of State set out how we'll make sure we capture those benefits so domestically and show the leadership we need to drive investment, growth and opportunities to every part of the UK to ensure that we've got a coherent economic strategy that touches every part of our nation?
Well, I think both parts of what my honourable friend says are right. Since we are only 1% of global emissions, we must work with others to make sure we tackle this problem. And also, I think the biggest thing I find in this job is that clarity of purpose and direction makes a huge difference to private investors. Uncertainty is the enemy of investment. The certainty and the direction that this government is providing is absolutely the friend of companies investing in the UK.
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The constituencies like mine in Hartlepool and regions like the North East once powered the British economy. Does he agree with me that the leadership that we're now showing must secure investment for those regions that have been far too often left behind, and that investment must include new nuclear for towns like Hartlepool?
Absolutely right, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is the route to reindustrialisation. Nuclear is an absolutely central part of this government's clean energy mission. As I always say to people, we need all of the technologies at our disposal. We know that electricity use is going to at least double by 2050, and so we need all of the technologies at our disposal.
Mark Stewards.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Can I start by welcoming the Right Honourable Member's statement and for showing such leadership on the world stage alongside the Prime Minister. He mentioned in his statement that we have to show leadership, Britain has to show leadership in order to get the emissions down of the 99% of the rest of the world. And he also mentioned in his statement that nearly 1 billion people are at risk of drought, flooding and heat waves. Now, given the climate sceptics that now face him on the front bench opposite, can he restate for this House why it is in Britain's interests to help these people?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and the reason it is because my constituents in Doncaster have faced two supposedly 1 in 100-year events in the last 10 years or so in terms of flooding. Now, what we know is that those events will become much more extreme if we do not act. But the truth is that we can't just act on our own, we have to act with others. That is the fundamental case for multilateral engagement on these climate issues and working with others. The party opposite used to believe that, they don't seem to anymore.
Tristan Osborne.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for his statement and also his clear global leadership over many years on this issue. A constituent, Michael Jones, a leader in climate change education, attended Baku as part of the COP delegation with a delegation of students on the climate change challenge from across the UK to lead on efforts of educating policymakers on the impacts of climate change on the next generation. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that unlike the opposition that is flip-flopping and showing no consistency on this issue, that the next generation deserves better and a government with a firm commitment to deliver with the international community on a reduction in emissions?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right about this, which is that the truth is that, you know, they're sort of chuckling away, but the truth is a very serious and important point, Madam Deputy Speaker. The British people want us to act. They want us to act across parties on this issue. They know it is a massive threat to our country because they see it in their daily lives and they see it on the news, and they also know it is the biggest opportunity of our country. We believe it. They used to believe it. I'm afraid they are way out of step with the British people.
Which brings us to the next item of business. I will allow a few moments for those who wish to leave the chamber to do so quickly and quietly, please. And the front benches can switch over. We now come to a statement on the Get Britain Working White Paper. Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions, Liz Kendall.
With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to make a statement on our Get Britain Working White Paper, bringing forward the biggest reforms to employment support in a generation, turning a Department for Welfare into a Department for Work, taking the first steps towards delivering our bold ambition of an 80% employment rate in a decade of national renewal. Madam Deputy Speaker, nothing short of fundamental reform is needed to turn the page on the last 14 years. A legacy which left the UK as the only G7 country whose employment rate hasn't returned to pre-pandemic levels. A near record 2.8 million people out of work due to long-term sickness. Almost 1 million young people not in education, employment or training, and millions more stuck in low-paid, insecure work. With all these problems, far worse in parts of the country, in the Midlands and the North, that were de-industrialised in the 80s and 90s, the very same places that have lower life expectancy and chronic poor health, areas which the party opposite repeatedly promised to level up, but repeatedly failed to deliver. And the result is an economic, but above all social crisis, paid for in the life chances and living standards of people right across this country, and by a benefits bill for sickness and disability that is set to rise by £26 billion by the end of this Parliament. And the reason we have ended up here is the failure of members opposite to create good jobs in every part of the country, to deliver on the NHS, and to properly reform welfare. But under our government, this will change, with new opportunities, matched by the responsibility to take them up. Because under this Labour government, if you can work, you must work. Madam Deputy Speaker, our white paper brings in 3 major reforms. First, we will create a new jobs and careers service, overhauling job centres from a one-size-fits-all service that overwhelmingly focuses on administering benefits into a genuine public employment service, providing personalised support for all. Today, I can announce we will bring job centres together with the National Careers Service in England, beginning with a Pathfinder early next year, backed with £55 million of initial funding. We'll work closely with mayors and local leaders to ensure our new jobs and careers service is rooted in local communities and properly joined up with local help and support. And we'll work closely with employers to develop the service too, because when only 1 in 6 businesses has ever used a job centre to recruit, this has got to change. For too many people, walking into a job centre feels like you're back in the 80s or 90s. So we will trial a radically improved digital offer, using the latest technologies and AI to provide up-to-date information on job skills and other support, and to free up work coach time, and testing video and phone support too, because in the 2020s, you shouldn't only have to go into the job centre every week or fortnight when you could have a job centre in your pocket. And because our frontline staff are our greatest asset, we'll develop the work coach and careers advisor professions, including by launching a new coaching academy. Madam Deputy Speaker, the second major reform is our new youth guarantee, so every young person is earning or learning. This comes alongside our commitment to provide mental health support in every school, our work experience and careers advice offer, and our plans to reform the last government's failed apprenticeship levy to give more young people the opportunities they deserve. But our new youth guarantee will go further, bringing together all the support for 18 to 21-year-olds under the leadership of mayors and local areas, so all young people have access to education, training and employment opportunities, and so that no young person misses out. Today I can announce we will establish 8 trailblazers for our youth guarantee in the Liverpool City region, the West Midlands, Tees Valley, East Midlands, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, west of England, and 2 areas within Greater London, backed by £45 million of additional funding. I can also announce a new national partnership to provide exciting opportunities for young people in sports, arts and culture, starting with some of Britain's most iconic cultural and sporting organisations, including the Premier League, the Royal Shakespeare Company and Channel 4, building on the brilliant work they already do to inspire and engage the younger generation and get them on the pathway to success. This is our commitment to young people. We value you. You are important. We will invest in you and give you the chances and choices you deserve. But in return for these new opportunities, you have a responsibility to take them up. Because being unemployed or lacking basic qualifications when you're young can harm your job prospects and wages for the rest of your life. And that is not good enough for young people or for our country. The third major reform in our white paper is our new plan to drive down economic inactivity caused by poor health. The Health Secretary is already taking action to get people back to health and back to work, with extra support to drive down waiting lists in the 20 NHS trusts with the highest levels of economic inactivity. We're joining up employment and health support, expanding individual placement support to reach an additional 140,000 people with mental health problems, and delivering new work-well services, which includes GPs referring patients to employment advisors and other work-related support, like the brilliant service in the Junction Medical Practice in North London that we visited recently. But we will go much further and faster to tackle this issue. To meet the scale of the challenge, we will devolve new funding, new powers and new responsibilities to tackle economic inactivity to mayors and local areas, because local leaders know their communities best. We'll support all areas in England to produce local Get Britain working plans, joining up work, health and skills support. Today, I'm announcing 8 trailblazer areas backed by £125 million of additional funding in South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, the North East, Greater Manchester, Wales, York and North Yorkshire, and 2 Greater London areas. In 3 of these areas, South and West Yorkshire and the North East, this will include dedicated input and £45 million of funding for local NHS integrated care systems. And we're funding a new supported employment programme called Connect to Work, backed by £115 million of initial funding for next year. This will be included in the integrated settlements of combined authorities, starting with Greater Manchester and the West Midlands. Because employers have such an important role to play in helping get people into work and, crucially, to stay in work, I can today announce a new independent Keep Britain Working review, looking at the role of UK employers and government in tackling health-related inactivity and creating healthy workplaces. This will be led by the former chair of John Lewis, Sir Charlie Mayfield, and it will report in the autumn. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I can tell the House we will bring forward a green paper with our own proposals on reforming the health and disability benefits system, so disabled people and those with health conditions have the same rights as everybody else, including the right to work. So we treat disabled people with dignity and respect, and so we shift the focus to prevention and respond to the complex and fluctuating nature of today's health conditions. We'll work closely with disabled people and their organisations as we develop our proposals, which we will publish in the spring. Madam Deputy Speaker, this white paper starts to turn the corner on the last 14 years, putting forward the real reforms we need to get more people into work and on at work, to give young people the very best start in life, and to ensure our employment and social security system understand this fundamental issue, that a healthy nation and a healthy economy are 2 sides of the same coin. This is how we get Britain working again. It's how we get Britain growing again. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State Helen Whately.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of her statement. The Conservatives are the party of work and aspiration. In the decade after we took over from Labour, we drove down unemployment.
The Shadow Secretary of State.
In the decade after we took over from Labour, we drove down unemployment and economic inactivity year after year, including youth unemployment, down by 400,000 after the mess we inherited from the last Labour government. During the pandemic, we took unprecedented action to protect jobs and livelihoods. But since the pandemic, we've faced a new and difficult challenge in this country: rising economic inactivity, particularly among young people. In government, we were tackling this. I know that, because as Health Minister, I was working on it. Our Work Well pilots. I'm delighted that the Right Honourable Lady and the Health Secretary visited one of our Work Well pilots just the other day. And on our Fit Note reforms, our youth offer, which helped 1 million young people, and our universal support scheme, which I now hear the Secretary of State has quietly rebranded as her own Connect to Work scheme.
You're welcome.
But far from being cross that the government is pinching our ideas, I welcome the Right Honourable Lady taking our work forwards, and that she's making the right noises about how important this is to fix. Economic inactivity is a big problem for our economy, and for each and every individual who risks being written off to a life on benefits. Knowing that, I am disappointed in the substance of what she is announcing today, because far from matching her rhetoric, this appears to be little more than a pot of money for local councils, some disparaging language about the work of job centres, and a consultation which will be launched in the spring. Given that they have had 14 years to prepare for this moment, is that it?
14 years.
Where are the reforms to benefits which will actually make material savings to the taxpayer, like the 12 billion we committed to save in our manifesto? Where are the reforms to Fit Notes, which we had handed over all ready to go? Where is her plan for reforming the workplace capability assessment? Right. She has banked the 3 billion of savings from our plan, but failed to set out her own. And her big announcement on making benefits for young people conditional, did she forget that they already are? The fact is, the Secretary of State has dodged the tough decisions. Every day she kicks the can down the road, costs the taxpayer millions of pounds, at this rate rising to 100 billion on sickness benefits by the end of this Parliament. Money that instead they are taking from farmers, from pensioners, from businesses, Madam Deputy Speaker. But to get people off benefits, you need jobs for them to go into. The very jobs businesses are saying, since the budget, they will no longer be hiring for. So while the Right Honourable Lady tries to get people into work, her Chancellor is busy destroying jobs. 50,000 jobs lost from her first budget alone. I put it to the Right Honourable Lady that if she wants to get more 18-year-olds into work, she should have a word with her Chancellor, who has made it so that from April it will cost £5,000 more for a business to employ them. And her Business Secretary, whose Employment Rights Bill will, according to their own impact assessment, make it less likely for employers to take on young people. The government cannot solve this problem on their own. Businesses are the engine of our economy that create jobs for people to do. And it is telling, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I can't see a single business represented on their new Labour Market Advisory Board. I did hear the Right Honourable Lady talk about some new partnerships. But this announcement is such a song and dance about so little, I feel sure she will qualify for one of her own Royal Shakespeare Company apprenticeships. She has kicked the can. She's kicked the can so far down the road that her new partner, the Premier League, is sure to be on the phone by the end of the day. Madam Deputy Speaker, can I for a moment cut through the word soup of the announcement? It is time for the Right Honourable Lady to tell the House some facts. How many people will this help into work, and by when? What is the total she is saving the taxpayer? When will she reach her 80% employment target? What return on investment is she expecting from these plans? How will she measure her success or failure? Because this is so far from the bold grasping of the nettle that she is making it out to be, and that this country needs for our economy, for taxpayers, and for the millions of people missing out on the purpose and freedom that work brings. This is simply not good enough.
Secretary of State.
May I gently say to the Honourable Lady, who I personally like and have a great deal of time for, the only people who dodge difficult decisions on welfare are the party opposite. And the facts speak for themselves. By the end of this Parliament, the OBR says 420,000 more people will be on health-related universal credit benefits, rising from a third now to a half at the end of the Parliament. That's her government's legacy. 1 in 8 of all of our young people are now not in education, employment or training. We have seen a doubling of the number of those young people out of work due to long-term sickness, and a doubling of those young people out of work because of mental health problems. After 14 years in government, who does she actually think is responsible for that? And I'm afraid the truth is now staring her in the face. The Conservatives are now the party of welfare, and Labour is the party of work. She talks about British businesses. I mean, I know only too well the pressures many businesses face, and we have spoken to the CBI, the Federation of Small Businesses, the British Chamber of Commerce, and they are really keen to work with us on our proposals. They know their members have hundreds of thousands of vacancies they need to fill, 1 in 3 of which are because of skills gaps. They know that 300,000 people every single year fall out of work due to a health condition, and that they need support to try and tackle that problem. I believe that the DWP and job centres should serve businesses' needs and aspirations, not be the place of last resort, which is precisely what our reforms will deliver. And I would finally just say this. The biggest challenge we face today is the growing number of people out of work or at risk of falling out of work due to health problems or a disability. And our entire employment and benefit system are simply not geared up to deal with this. We will take examples of good practice from wherever we find them, but we have got to go much further, much further. We need big reforms, not easy slogans that say people just felt a bit too bluesy to work, that do nothing to help people get to grips with the real issues in their lives. We are facing up to our responsibilities and the difficult decisions necessary to get Britain working again. It's time she and her party opposite did the same.
Chair of the Work and Pensions Select Committee, Debbie Abrahamson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement, and I look forward to reading the white paper later, and particularly in terms of the cross-departmental approach that she's taking with colleagues. I think this is absolutely essential and a breath of fresh air, particularly in relation to tackling the root causes of economic inactivity, which she's explained is around predominantly ill health. In addition to tackling the regional inequalities in employment, she'll be aware that there's also a 30% disability employment gap, with 2.25 million disabled people who want to work and who are able to work. So how will she be specifically tackling this real injustice? We know that disabled people are more likely to be living in poverty than other groups. What are her specific plans in this regard?
I thank my honourable friend for that important question. Myself and the Minister for Social Security are working really hard to to tear down those barriers to disabled people being able to get work and get in work. We are taking action across government, including reporting on the disability employment gap. We need to tackle the long waits for access to work, the adaptations and other support that people need. But I think we also need to have some brilliant programs that we're already seeing, supported employment programs for people with autism and learning difficulties that I and my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, have recently visited in our own NHS trusts, which really provide a pathway to work with the right help and support. There's much more we need to do, and I look forward to discussing these issues with her and other members of the committee.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Jess Brown-Fuller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The UK was the only economy to see employment rates fall over the last 5 years under the Conservatives, leaving a legacy of wrecked apprenticeships, mental health services not fit for purpose, and leaving millions on waiting lists unable to work, and those with caring responsibilities staying at home to provide care for their loved ones because of a failure in our social care system. The Liberal Democrats welcome steps to improve access to skills, training and education. And I would like to personally praise the work of FedCap and Maximus UK, who are doing just that in Chichester, working in conjunction with the job centres, with those who have had long periods of economic inactivity or have additional challenges when finding work. But the insecurity and short-term nature of government funding for those projects means that both organisations had to pause their referrals this year while they waited for the government to confirm their continued funding. I'm sure the Secretary of State agrees with me that to get people back into work, the organisations trying to do that already need more security from the government. And when it comes to tackling the mental health crisis, it is not enough to reverse the Conservatives' lack of action. The government must be proactive in improving mental health services, and I invite the Secretary of State to take the proactive ideas the Liberal Democrats laid out in our general election manifesto, such as catching more mental health conditions early on by offering mental health MOTs, and also the introduction of mental health hubs in every community to deliver an ease of access to walk-in services and support. And it is abundantly clear that ensuring people get the NHS treatment they need is critical to getting back to work. The NHS cannot tackle their long waiting lists unless the government gets serious about fixing the crisis in social care. We've heard lots of words from the government on social care, but little action, with the increase in social care budget totally eroded by the national insurance contribution rise. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that a healthy society is a productive society, and fixing the health and social care crisis will get our country back to work?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and yes, I do agree that we've got to tackle the root causes of the problem here and have an NHS and social care system that is fit for purpose. I think we have put forward our commitments around mental health support in every school and every community. We know many mental health problems start before someone turns 18, so we've got to try and prevent those problems happening in the first place. But there's much, much more we need to do. We are starting to see fantastic NHS services which provide employment advice as part of care. And that is because the evidence shows that if you're in good work, that is good for your mental health, a sense of purpose and structure. My right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, is pushing this to be available in all parts of the country. I am under no illusions about the scale of the challenge. Only 3% of people who are economically inactive get back to work in any given year. So we've got to prevent the problems from happening in the first place, as well as doing more to help those people into work.
Neil Coyle.
Speaker, under the last government, DWP faced legal action for its unlawful treatment of disabled people. How will this white paper, this positive vision, rebuild trust and better support disabled people going forward?
This government believes that disabled people have the same rights as everybody else, including the right to work. And our mission is to break down those barriers. Many disabled people want to work if they could get the right help and support and a job that fits their needs and concerns with greater flexibility. I think this is a really important challenge. I don't blame disabled people often for being frightened and worried when they hear about these discussions after what's happened over the past 14 years. But we will work with disabled people and the organisations that represent them to get this right, get the world of work, the employment support system, and a better functioning system of disability benefits. This is a really big challenge for our country, but I think with these proposals we're taking an important step forward.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the ambition of the Secretary of State in many of the areas she set out this afternoon, particularly the Keep Britain Working initiative. I think we have got to, as a Parliament, come to terms with the obesity and mental health crises that we have, and therefore I welcome what she's doing with the Secretary of State for Health. But could I bring to her attention the work of South Wilts MenCap. Recently, I've met with Robin Clifford, and over 14 years, I've seen the work that they do as a group of trustees with adult learning disabled, a special group of individuals in my constituency. And I welcome the opportunity perhaps to meet with the member for East Ham to look at programmes that could be started or pilots that could be undertaken to get these learning disabled into meaningful activity where they can make some contribution through paid work.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that very important contribution. I and my colleague, the Minister for Social Security and Disability, would indeed be very keen to hear more about that work. I recently visited a supported employment programme run by my local health service for young people with autism and severe learning difficulties. It was a year-long supported internship programme. They had to start by actually talking to the parents about what the young person could do, not just what they couldn't do. They had to actually literally physically get on the bus to get them to work. They tried 3 different jobs around the hospital to find the one that best matched their needs. And every single young person after that year was given a paid job. It's so successful, we're expanding it to the local university and to one of Leicester's biggest hotel chains. These changes are possible, and I'm very keen to work with him in his area to make sure we give those opportunities.
Jill German.
Speaker. I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement today, and I do believe that these reforms will be transformative, and it's not before time. In my constituency of Clwyd North, we've long recognised the gaps that exist in the system, and our local authorities have put in place the brilliant Working Denbighshire programme and also Conwy Employment Hub that really drills down into what local people need and take them on a pathway into work. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that devolving power and crucially funding in the way that she's set out is absolutely key to achieving the best results we can for the local people in their own area?
This is a major change in our approach. Local areas know best their needs and the different organisations that can help achieve the goals. I know my city, my economic inactivity is predominantly driven by people with caring responsibilities. Other parts of the country, it's more physical health or mental health problems, and we need different things in different parts of the country. I think that's the best way to get the best results. It's a big change for the Department for Work and Pensions to be a much more localised service and to be much more joined up with other parts of government, both nationally and locally. But that's the way we get the change that we deliver.
Lewis Cocking.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Businesses in my constituency of Broxbourne are really worried and are putting off investing and creating jobs because of the party's opposite budget, in particular the increase in regulations and the national insurance increase. How does she plan to get everyone, how does the Minister plan to get everyone back to work who should be in work if there are no jobs that exist out there?
I do understand the pressures that many businesses are under. You know, I think that the budget was trying to deal with a very difficult issue, which is if you're spending more than you earn and your public finances aren't working, you've got to deal with that. Anyone who runs a business knows that you've got to get the finances right. But I think many organisations do recognise that they need to recruit more people with the skills they need that meet their particular concerns. They are worried about the increasing number of health conditions, people leaving work because of that. I'm determined to work with and to serve businesses locally, and I'd be very happy to meet with him to talk about the specific needs of businesses in his constituents.
David Pinto-Dushinsky.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to warmly welcome the White Paper. I think it's a huge step forward. Mental health challenges have been the biggest single driver of rising inactivity among the young. And we also we know that mental health can be hugely helped by work. One study shows that even just 8 hours of work a week will reduce risk of depression and anxiety by up to 30%. Given that, what will the Secretary of State do to help support those at risk from mental health issues get back to work?
Thank my honourable friend for that question. I've already talked about what we aim to do to prevent mental health problems from happening in the first place, with more mental health support in schools and in the community. But what I really see this as is a really fundamental overhaul of the way DWP and the NHS work together, that we start to see support into the right jobs for the right people with mental health problems as part of what the NHS does, putting those employment advisors into the NHS, the individual placement and support service, which did begin under the last government through the NHS. The results have been quite phenomenal. 40% of people in work after 5 years, and their use of the health service, their number of relapses and days they spend in hospital, reduced to better for work, better for mental health. That requires a big change in the way we work, but myself and my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, are determined to make that happen.
Kirsty Blackman.
Madam Speaker, many disabled or ill people were terrified by the Tories' proposals to cut £3 billion from sickness benefit. Given that Labour are continuing along this cut, will the Secretary of State today promise to sign up to the principle of nothing about us without us, and ensure that disabled people, those with ill health and those with lived experience of these systems, are round the table making the decisions on how this moves forward?
I've always been a big champion when I worked in social care of working in partnership with people to get the right decisions right first time. And I think that's really important, which is why myself and the Minister for Social Security and Disability are absolutely clear that we will work with disabled people in the organisations to get this system right. But I want to be really, really clear here. The system isn't working. You have to wait weeks on end to get an assessment. They're often overturned at tribunals. We don't do enough to prevent people from falling out of the workplace. 90% of people who get back into work after a bout of sickness do so within the first year. But we don't use that opportunity to provide the help and support that they need. We do need change. I understand how worried people are when they hear about change, but they themselves, I think, would also say the change needs to happen, and we're determined to put that in place.
Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome the statement by my right honourable friend today, because giving people the opportunity to get on in life and have dignity and good work is at the heart of what drove me to this place. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that helping people into work in Paisley and Renfrewshire South is about getting the economy growing again, as well as putting more money into people's pockets? And can she say a little bit more about the discussions she's had with the Scottish Government to ensure that they will play their full part in making sure this works?
We're absolutely determined to get more people into better paid jobs in every part of the country. That is the key to improving people's living standards and to getting the economy growing again. Our new Jobs and Careers Service will look different in Scotland because the Scottish Government is responsible for running the careers service there, but we are already in discussions about how we make sure our plans meet the specific needs of people in Scotland, including in her constituency, and I look forward to receiving her ideas and suggestions, as I know she will always provide.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want the Secretary of State to succeed. I want her to be part of the first Labour majority government ever to leave office with employment higher than when it started. I had hoped today to hear a little bit more about reform rather than just a review, but it is a welcome step in the right direction. What businesses in Basildon and Billericay have been telling me is that while I'm sure they'll welcome some of the schemes, and I'm sure some of those schemes will go on to do good things, they are absolutely terrified by both the taxes coming through national insurance and the hit on them through business rates as well. And with the OBR saying there's going to be at least 50,000 jobs a year going because of those changes, where are the people that she's hoping to get off benefits and into work going to find that employment?
Secretary of State.
As I've said to other honourable members here, I am really keen to talk to businesses in his constituency and right across the country about the challenges that they face. We did take a decision when we got into office that we couldn't continue with the fantasy economics, that you can't spend more than you earn, that we have to invest in the long-term physical infrastructure of the country, but also in our people, who are our best assets. So we've got to get the NHS back on its feet. I know the issues that businesses face, but they are also thinking about the longer term, the vacancies, how on earth they get the skills they need that are particular to their own business in that area. And I'm very, very happy to talk to the honourable gentleman about that if he would like.
Clive Efford.
Speaker, I welcome the statement from my right honourable friend, and particularly the coaches and assistants for young people getting into work. But what she describes seems to fit neatly with what the government is proposing in terms of the green economy and highly skilled, well-paid jobs. Can she say something about how the training for those jobs will play a part in getting those people from unemployment into work?
My honourable friend hits the nail on the head. The Get Britain Working white paper is part of a much wider series of reforms the government is making to create more good jobs in every part of the country, including in green energy and through our modern industrial strategy, and our plans to make work pay through the New Deal for working people. Yesterday, I was at a college actually in Peterborough, where they are looking at how they upskill young people to get the clean, green energy jobs of the future. That needs to happen in every part of the country, because we want the new jobs that we are creating to be available to those who need them most. And that is something that we haven't really managed to fit together before, getting the DWP and our Get Britain Working plans underpinning our local growth plans. That is a big change, but something we have to deliver to make sure that everybody in this country benefits from the jobs we are creating in future.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome much of what the Secretary of State has said, and I'm delighted that she's assured us that there's going to be discussions with the Scottish Government about plans for Scotland. But throughout the past 2 or 3 years, I've had businesses in my constituency tell me that they cannot get people to work for them. They are concerned about that, so this strategy will be welcome. But does the Secretary of State appreciate that many of us see a contradiction in this policy and the national insurance changes? Because a major employer in my constituency of Edinburgh West tells me it's going to cost them £250,000 extra a year, and they won't be taking on seasonal workers because they can't afford it. So how does that damaging policy for business go alongside trying to encourage more people back out to work?
I think businesses, of course they face these pressures, but I think many businesses also understand you have to actually have a government that is looking at the fundamentals. And we did face a problem with the public finances when we got into government. And my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, took a decision that the only way we can sort out the country for the long term is to get the public finances back on a more sustainable footing. And I would also say to her, businesses that I go and meet, including Tesco in my own constituency, yes, they did raise concerns with me, but they've also said they really want to get more young people into work who have mental health problems. They're doing a brilliant partnership with the King's Trust on this to get them into work and help them stay in work, because they know the key to their future is to get those skills so they can grow their business and really make the changes that this country needs.
Andy MacDonald.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend for her statement. My constituents in Middlesbrough and Thornaby East will very much welcome the additional funding for young people in the Tees Valley and the modernising of the job centres to better assist our wonderful job centre staff. But can the Minister say something about how this is going to dovetail with the Employment Rights Bill and ensure that young people are offered quality employment and training opportunities and not pressured into accepting inadequate and insecure zero-hour job offers? And can the Minister also say something about how the Government and members will be able to monitor and evaluate the delivery of the Youth Trailblazer programme by combined mayoral authorities?
My honourable friend will know that our plan to make work pay, to bring in those day one employment rights, end exploitative zero-hours contracts, improve flexibility at work, are all the things that we need to make sure there are good quality job options out there for young people. And I would say to him on the point about combined authorities. There will be new leadership roles for mayors and combined authorities, but also clear accountability for delivering on the outcomes we want to see, which is that every young person has an opportunity to earn or learn, and we will make sure that happens.
Sir Desmond Swain.
To ensure that if you can work, you must work, will she familiarise herself with the works of Jeremy Bentham?
If I have time.
Alan Gemmell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've heard much about the failures of the party opposite, but after 17 years of SNP failures, young people in Central Ayrshire are looking to this government for the opportunities of a good job. Can my right honourable friend say what more she's going to do to help young people in Central Ayrshire and across Scotland from today's announcement?
It is hugely important that we deliver these new opportunities in every part of the country. That includes young people and people of all ages in Scotland. We will work with the Scottish Government to deliver this, but also really importantly with local councils who have a huge role to play here. Our job centres really need to change. They need to meet the needs of employers and future employees in every part of the country. I look forward to working with my honourable friend to get his ideas about what will work best, and perhaps we could do a joint visit to his job centre.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's all very well us talking about Department for Work, but one of the challenges often is that we fail those in employment who are still interacting with the benefit system. I've got a number of constituents in North East Fife who are paid on a 4-weekly basis, but also claim universal credit, which means 1 month a year they lose their universal credit. And being told simply to try and put money aside to bridge that gap isn't, I don't think, a professional way for us to support those people. I know it's been an ongoing challenge, but is the consultation going to look at issues such as these?
The Honourable Lady raises a really important point, and we have a clear manifesto commitment to review universal credit, to tackle poverty and to make work pay. That issue has been raised a lot with me and my right honourable friend, the Minister for Social Security and Disability, and I'm sure it's something that he will be looking closely at, because we need our benefit system to match the reality of people's working lives today. So that's a very important point she's raised.
Yuan Yang.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much commend the Minister's youth guarantee. In my constituency of Early and Woodley, there are many businesses who've invested in the high-tech industries of the future. However, I do speak to young people and their families who are concerned about getting jobs at the first rung of the ladder in the present day. There'll be 3,000 undergraduates graduating from the University of Reading this year, a further 3,000 people turning 18 in my constituency, and ask the Minister what she and her department can do for those young people to ensure that local jobs and skills training opportunities match the economic advantages of the area that they're from.
I personally believe that we actually need to start much younger than 18 with good work experience and careers advice in schools. I've certainly seen that in my own constituency, whereas as young as in primary schools, teachers have been bringing in people from different jobs, in different professions, to open children's eyes and their minds to the possibility of the world of work that's out there. This is why I think we need to bring together everything that's happening in our schools, our colleges, and the world of work. That is the way that we open up possibilities for young people in future. The Youth Guarantee, I hope, in local areas will do precisely that and provide the opportunities that her young constituents need and deserve.
Jim Allister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I note that the white paper is called Get Britain Working Again, not Get the United Kingdom Working Again. Now, I appreciate there are devolution issues, but when I listen to her statement, I find it is very England-only orientated. There are references to national partnerships, but where does this fit within the matrix of getting the United Kingdom working again? And will there be Barnett consequentials, and then will it be left up to the sometimes failing devolved institutions?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Actually, Northern Ireland has one of the highest rates of economic inactivity in the United Kingdom, and that is a real concern, I'm sure, for him and for me. I've already spoken to the minister responsible, and I think there are things that we could look at that are happening in Northern Ireland to see whether there are lessons that could be learned for elsewhere in the country. We will always work closely with the devolved administrations to make sure our plans match people's needs in every part of the country, because that's what his constituents and the country as a whole deserve.
John McDonnell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the is opposite. It looks like the Conservative Party have adopted a policy of a 3 or 2 day week to tackle the unemployment. Can I refer to my register of interest as chair of the PCS parliamentary group? From the tone and the statement today, my understanding of the government's position is an acknowledgement that it will be support, not sanctions, that will tackle this issue overall. And that support will come from new employment centres within our constituencies, staffed by fully trained, motivated and well-paid staff at SELC. The Secretary of State has mentioned meeting businesses and with mayors. Could I ask also that she meets with the trade unions, and we'd welcome a meeting with her from the PCS parliamentary group to talk through the rollout of this particular programme, which will benefit both the staff themselves and, in addition to that, the recipients of their services.
I thank my right honourable friend for his question. I think our 16,000 work coaches and other frontline job centre staff are our biggest asset. Some of them have worked for the DWP for 25, 30 years because they care about their communities. I think they have been stifled by the system that's had this sort of overwhelming focus on monitoring and administering benefits. They know what their local areas want and need. I spoke to the head of the TUC yesterday about our plans, and I'm sure myself or the Minister for Employment will be very, very happy to meet the PCS to talk about how we take these plans forward.
Sarah Dyke.
Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for this statement. 13% of jobs in Somerset are in manufacturing, many in the defence industry, such as Thales in Templecombe, RNAS Yeovilton, in my constituency in Leonardo, nearby. The manufacturing industry contributes £1.87 billion to our local economy, which is more than any other single industry. However, data shows that women represent only 30% of the STEM workforce. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that we should be making more targeted interventions to support more women into this important industry?
100%. I could not agree with the Honourable Lady more. We need to get more women into manufacturing, engineering, all those STEM subjects. And indeed, I met many apprentices yesterday on a visit to Peterborough College, young women who said, this is for me, more women need to do this. It's a great job, a great career, great pay, 100%.
Conor Rand.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's wonderful to hear from my right honourable friend that Greater Manchester will be one of the trailblazer areas for these vital reforms. But when I speak to businesses in Altrincham and Sale West, they tell me that the greatest challenge they face is recruiting people to fill vacancies. So can the Secretary of State outline a little further how these plans will ensure that businesses can recruit the skilled staff that they need and give young people in my constituency great opportunities in the process?
I think this is really one of the biggest challenges many employers face, and the reason why many are so keen on apprentices, as I was told yesterday, is we can mould young people with the specific skills that their company needs. I think that there's two things here. One is that we are reforming the apprenticeship levy into a new growth and skills levy, so businesses can have much more flexibility in how they use that. But also, I think there's a lot of young people who have missed out on those basic skills, maths and English GCSE, who can't even get onto an apprenticeship. So we need that training, or those foundation apprenticeships, which is a key part of the changes that we want to make and that we want to spread through our youth guarantee, including across Greater Manchester.
Anne Davies.
Diolch, Madam Dirprwy Llefarydd. The Workways team, which is run by Carmarthenshire County Council in my constituency Caerfyrddin, do impressive work in facilitating access to critical skills and give career opportunities to people who are out of work. They receive funding through the Shared Prosperity Fund, which of course is coming on is due to an end. Can the Minister tell me how such vital organisations in Wales will benefit from her department's plans? Diolch.
I think the whole point of devolving responsibility and accountability to mayors and local leaders is precisely because they will know best the organisations that they need to involve in tackling economic inactivity, in delivering the youth guarantee, and in really embedding job centres into local communities. That is precisely why we're making these changes. The UK Shared Prosperity Fund, there is an additional £900 million for 25-26. That is a key part of this that we need to join up, but I'm very happy if she writes to me with information so I can look at that in more detail.
Nadia Whittam.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for her statement. Barriers to employment and a lack of workplace support for disabled people remain persistent challenges, as well as inadequate social security payments for everyone, regardless of employment status. Can my right honourable friend reassure disabled people that the government's new support measures will not be conditional on being able to work and that no one will be sanctioned for non-attendance at medical appointments?
I mean, I think sanctioning people because they go to the NHS to get themselves as fit and healthy as possible is completely the wrong approach. I understand why disabled people, when they hear talk about helping people into work or reforms to sickness and disability benefits, why they're worried because of what happened over the last 14 years. We are determined to break down those barriers to work. I think many disabled people, given the right help and support and the right flexibility to work, could work and want to work. That's what we are focused on, and that's what we're determined to deliver.
Bobby Dean.
Deputy Speaker. In Carshalton and Wallington, we have got a fantastic local social enterprise that has been helping adults with disabilities back into work. They've even recently set up a cafe which is entirely run by adults with learning disabilities. How does the department plan to take evidence from innovative organisations like this? And will she meet with the organisation to find out about the work they've been doing?
The reason why I'm so passionate about devolving responsibility and accountability to local areas is that it is precisely in order to engage the organisations he's talking about. I mean, I know the different organisations in Leicester. I don't in his constituency. So that's why I believe we have to have a much more localised system. And if he'd like to write to me with details, I'd be very keen to look at them.
Claire Hughes.
Speaker, can I thank my honourable friend for her statement? Measures such as the Young Person's Guarantee, which are already developing and working successfully in Wales, are really welcome. And on that note, could the Secretary of State perhaps outline a little bit further how she will work with the Welsh Government to deliver on this plan to make work pay?
Secretary of State. As my honourable friend said, there's already a Young Person's Guarantee in Wales. The job centre reforms will look different in Wales because the Welsh Government is responsible for the career service, but we really do want to work with them and employers to really overhaul the approach that they have, to unleash the ideas of our work coaches, to free up their time to focus on those who need help most, to make sure our job centres become the first port of call, not the last port of call, to recruit their next star employee, and so that they are much more joined up with local skills support, health support. We will be having those conversations with the Welsh Government, and I'd be really keen to get her input too.
Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituent, Diana, has a daughter who has autism and lives independently with some low-level support. She has previously had a part-time role whilst living in Bath with help from an employment support job coach, and she wishes to do the same, having now moved to my constituency of Mid-Sussex. However, she has found this much harder since moving and has yet to find similar support in Sussex. How is the Minister going to tackle the postcode lottery that exists for those in need of extra support to get into employment?
Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that she hasn't had the same levels of support that she previously had. It's quite clear that with the right support, she is able to engage with the world of work as well as live an independent life, which is what she wants. Our reforms are intended to make sure that that support is available everywhere. If she would like to forward details of that, I'd be very happy to take a look.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's vital that people are supported into fulfilling well-paid work so they can fulfil their potential. The Secretary of State rightly mentions the importance that she's putting upon discussing with disabled people and disabled people's groups these changes and reforms. Can I ask the Secretary of State, as part of those discussions, to ask disabled people and disabled people's groups about the work capability assessment, because in my constituency surgery in Leeds, so many people come who feel degraded, demeaned by the work capability assessment tests, and actually so many of those decisions turn out to be wrong and are successfully appealed later.
My honourable friend will know that that is why our manifesto, on which we were all elected, said that we would reform or replace the work capability assessment. People wait for both for that and for PIP for between 14 and 18 weeks on average to get an assessment. Around 70% of decisions on WCA and PIP can be overturned at tribunal. We need a system that gets the right decision right first time, because that, I think, is what disabled people need and it is what they deserve.
Sian Berry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State has given us some positive new spending plans today, but also really mixed messages for young people. Some investment on the one hand, new conditions, what she calls responsibilities on the other. So will the Secretary of State commit to really work with and empower young people to shape this new spending in local areas, potentially challenge any new conditions on support, particularly neurodiverse young people whose perspectives are vital and who are really worried what this will mean for their well-being and life chances?
The white paper will include a new youth employment panel so that we genuinely engage with young people in developing our proposals. But let me say this, I really believe that it is vital that young people are in education, employment or training when they're young, because the impact that if they're not can be lifelong. Today's world, if you lack basic skills, is brutal. And if you are unemployed when you're young, that can have a lifelong impact on your future job prospects and earnings potential. So I do believe that alongside genuine new opportunities, there should be a responsibility to take them up. And you know what? I've never met a young person who doesn't want to work, who doesn't want to get skills, who doesn't want a chance. We will fulfill our side of the bargain and meet our responsibilities to provide those opportunities. And I believe, just as they did on the New Deal for Young People and the Future Jobs Fund, which the last Labour government set up, young people will take those chances up.
Sam Carling.
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I thank the Secretary of State for coming to set out these measures today around getting Britain working. And I'm also really pleased to see that Cambridge and Peterborough has been included as one of the areas for trailblazing the new youth guarantee. On Friday, I had a roundtable with local businesses, and one of the main things that was coming through from that was the lack of ability to recruit skilled people locally. So could the Secretary of State please outline how the measures she set forward today will help to address that situation?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I've already spoken quite a lot about changes to the apprenticeship levy, which I think are important. But there are many other things that we can do. We've seen real success with what's called sector-based work academies run by job centres. These are short 6-week courses giving the specific skills an employer needs alongside guaranteed work experience for the potential employee and a guaranteed interview. They have had a huge success for the person looking for work and for the employer because they get someone with the skills they actually need. We are committed to doing that this year, and I hope we will roll that out further. That's just one of many examples of how we can change our job centres and the DWP to better serve employers and their needs.
Lisa Smart.
Much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Stepping Hill Hospital in Hazel Grove has a huge repairs backlog, reported at being £130 million. We've had buildings knocked down because they're no longer safe, medics wading through flooded corridors, and most recently a light fitting falling down in a delivery suite when the couple were in active labour. This has a massive impact on the waiting lists and consequently the amount that my residents can work, including Anthony from my area who got in touch yesterday, waiting for rehab post a heart attack in June. Can the Secretary of State confirm that any extra funding will go to what local communities need in order to get back to work? Many of my constituents are as keen as mustard, but they're on waiting lists, rather than the most wonderful work coach who can do very little when somebody's awaiting surgery.
The Honourable Lady raises a massively important point, and I'm really sorry about what her constituents are experiencing. We've got to get people back to health and back to work. I mean, it is no wonder that so many people are out of work due to long-term sickness when we've got waiting lists at near record levels. That's why my Right Honourable friend, the Health Secretary, is sending in extra help, including doctors, to drive down waiting lists in the areas that need help most. It is a no-brainer to me that you've got to get people off the waiting list to get them back to work. That's what I mean about a healthy nation and a healthy workforce being two sides of the same coin.
Jen Craft.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thorough Lifestyle Solutions in my constituency are an excellent example of good practice in helping disabled people enter and stay in the workplace. They are particularly successful because they embody that maxim, nothing about us without us, run by, led by, designed by disabled people themselves. Will the Secretary of State commit to taking these kind of examples of best practice into consideration and ensuring the voices of disabled people and those with long-term health conditions are put at the very heart of this strategy?
Yes, and I think what she and many other honourable members today have highlighted is lots of individual examples of really good working, but we're not joining it up. It's not actually a central part of our employment system, when it absolutely should be. We know we need extra investment, and the Chancellor's put £240 million into this, but we are already spending money that we're not getting the most out of because it's not coordinated and joined up. That's what we mean by investment and reform together. If this is locally led with the right people involved who are doing all this fantastic work, we can make a really big difference.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, can I welcome this initiative from the government and recognise as well that this is not a problem which has been created by the government. This is one which has been with us for a long, long time and started long before July of this year. Northern Ireland has got the highest level of economic inactivity, despite the fact that I can think of many initiatives in my own constituency for people with learning difficulties, for apprenticeships in certain sectors, for the work of local colleges, etc. And yet, despite all of that, this problem persists. And that's in a case of full employment, practically. Can the Minister give us an assurance that despite the fact that we now have a budget which is going to make it more difficult to recruit, that she can set objectives for the number of people who she believes can be brought through from unemployment to work as a result of these initiatives?
The Right Honourable Gentleman raises so many important points there, and as I said earlier, it is absolutely the case that Northern Ireland has the highest levels of economic inactivity. We will be setting clear objectives for our plans as we work with the devolved administrations and with local levels to get the levels of economic inactivity down. This will be challenging because, as I said earlier, only 3% of people who are economically inactive actually get back to work each year. We need to increase that, and the only way we do it is by much more fully joining up work, health and skills support. I think too much of the focus of welfare reform over the past 14 years has been about the benefit system alone. The benefit system clearly can incentivise or disincentivise work. And we want it to incentivise work, but we also know it's all this other support, work, health and skills, that we need to join up if we're really going to get every part of the United Kingdom working again.
I think it might be helpful to say that this statement's going to run until 3 o'clock, so short questions, short answers would be very helpful. Andrew Lewin.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is a sad reality that there are fewer people in work today than in 2019 before the pandemic, so I'm under no illusions about the scale of the challenge. And when I talk to young people in Welwyn Hatfield, the thing that most concerns me is that they cite problems with their mental health so often as being a barrier to get into work or to progress in work. Could my right honourable friend reassure me that she will work in lockstep with the Secretary of State for Health, because we on these benches understand that investment in a healthy workforce is a down payment on future prosperity for us all?
Yeah. In the interests of brevity, yes.
Ian Sollum.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. St Neots, in my constituency, is the largest town in Cambridgeshire. It does not have a job centre. Residents in St Neots have to travel up to Huntingdon to, each week for their benefits. Where that absence has been, social enterprise has taken place. I attended the launch of the St Neots Citizens Hub last week that aims to connect individuals with opportunities, employers with talent, and really provide a safe space in the heart of the community to address those fundamental issues of skills gaps, including life skills, social isolation, financial insecurity. It sounds like a great example towards that new model of job centre. But would she ensure that staff at the job centre in Huntingdon could come down for 1 day a week and ensure that residents don't have to keep making that journey up to Huntingdon? Thank you.
Is a really important point. I think we want to see more of our work coaches going out to where people are rather than always expecting them to come in. And if all of that help and support is being provided, it sounds like exactly the sort of places that our work coaches should be based, and I will certainly bring that up with them.
Amanda Martin.
Madam Deputy Speaker, these changes are fantastic and much needed in getting Britain back to work after 14 years of dismissal and neglect of real lives and real people under the last government. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, areas like Portsmouth don't have a devolution deal yet. So can the Secretary of State assure me and give details of how those not in work in Portsmouth North will be able to get support and get back into work, and how we can make our job centre accessible to lift the children out of poverty, to lift people back into the community?
I want to reassure my honourable friend it's the same for me in my city. We don't have a devolution deal. The overhaul of our job centres, the drive to tackle economic inactivity with local Get Britain working plans, and our youth guarantee, whether you're not part of a mayoral or combined authority, that will be led locally, including through the local council. We are determined to deliver in every corner of the country because we believe everybody deserves an opportunity to work, and that's also what our country needs to get growing again.
Richard Ford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Stephen Tyso from East Devon used to be a police officer here in London in the Metropolitan Police. And he showed me footage of his involvement in the riots in London over a decade ago. He was severely injured. He was regarded by the DWP as disabled. Under the new right to work for disabled people, will she ensure that public servants who have been injured in the line of duty are not going to get hounded repeatedly by assessors?
I don't want to see people being hounded. I want them, if they are able to work, to get the support they need to do that. And I think that is the big challenge that we face. There are actually more disabled people working than ever before. But for many others, sometimes the conditions that they have may fluctuate. The world of work and the benefit system needs to understand that. I'm not interested in hounding people. I'm interested in providing that support. There should be conditions and responsibility within the system. That's been the case since the social security system was set up. But I really hope that that's not happening to his constituent, and if it is, maybe he could write to me and tell me more about it.
Sean Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Those who
can work, should work, but so should the support services as well. I welcome the Secretary of State's statement that transforms the public service around this. And following in the work the Local Government Association did in terms of work local money, the principles have been embraced. When I was the leader of the council in Telford and Wrekin, when we were driving down youth unemployment, we were expected to pay a data charge to the DWP to share data under the last Conservative government. Will the Secretary of State assure me that that will not happen under these plans to work local?
I will take that away and look at it. It seems to me to be completely the wrong approach to put barriers in the way of data sharing. If I look at some of the best innovations, I think particularly in Barnsley Council, where they have really shared the data between the health service, the job centre, DWP, about the people who are facing barriers to work, what needs to happen to put them right. We've got to enable that to happen everywhere. I want to tear down those barriers, not put more up. So I will definitely take that issue away.
Jim Dixon.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the innovation and the energy in the White Paper? It will make a huge difference to people and businesses across the country. In relation to the very welcome 8 trailblazer schemes announced today, can the Secretary of State set out how young people in areas without mayoral combined authorities will see support, such as my residents in Dartford and across the Thames estuary, where we want to see the fair growth that the government is offering?
I 100% want young people and all his constituents in Dartford to have the same chances. As I said in my reply earlier, I don't have a combined authority in my city, so I am acutely aware of this issue. That will be for local councils to lead. They will be developing local Get Britain working plans. They will be the responsible and accountable body over our youth guarantee. We have to deliver this everywhere because talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. And that's what we all came into politics to change.
Andrew Pakes.
Speaker, this is a momentous white paper